All right, good evening, everyone. We are reconvening the City of Tacoma Park City Council meeting for this evening. Just as a reminder, at 6:30 today, the council convened in closed session for the purpose of the NDC and the Tacoma Junction project, and the meeting was closed pursuant to Annotated Code of Maryland General Provisions, Article 3-305, B7 and 8, which permit a public body to meet in closed session to consult with counsel to receive legal advice and discuss pending or potential litigation with staff, consultants, or other individuals. And so prior to closed session, we let folks know that we will reconvene in the auditorium for our regular meeting. So just want to give a quick walkthrough of tonight's agenda. So tonight we are going to have two work sessions. The first is a request to close Ann Street for a Hispanic Heritage Month event on October the 22nd. And then the second is a presentation on the Complete Safe Streets update on the pedestrian and transportation safety recommendations. In terms of upcoming meetings, on Wednesday, October the 11th at 6:30, the City Council will convene in an administrative function session. We will meet in an administrative session regarding the city manager search, and administrative function sessions are closed to the public. On October the 11th, we will have our regular meeting starting at 7:30. We will start with a voting session on a resolution approving the closure of Ann Street for a Hispanic Heritage Month event on October the 22nd. We will also have three work sessions that evening. The first is the introduction of the Balancing Act tool, a continued discussion on our budget calendar, as well as a review of council priorities. Just as a reminder for my colleagues, on Sunday, October the 15th through Tuesday, October the 17th, many of us will be attending the Maryland Municipal League Fall Conference. And on Wednesday, October the 18th, we will have our regular council meeting at 7:30, and the work session will be the Public Space Management Plan, report on public engagement, and draft resolution adopting the plan, as well as the Housing Annual Report for FY 2023. On Wednesday, October the 25th at 7:30, we will have a voting session on a resolution adopting the Public Space Management Plan, as well as a work session reviewing the facilities regulations. And also, just as a reminder, on Saturday, October the 28th is Monster Bash, and on Tuesday, October the 31st is Halloween. And that will take us into November. So with that, given that we don't have any voting items tonight, I would like to open the floor for any general public comments. Do we have any members of the public here today that would like to provide general public comments?
Good evening. Good evening. It's nice to be on this side. Hello, members of the council and city staff. My name's Casey Kostick. I'm a resident of Ward 3, and I'm here today to speak about the work session on pedestrian safety and traffic safety. I sent you a letter earlier today, but it was rather late in the day, and I'm sure you may not have all read it, so I wanted to just speak to highlight a few items in it. First of all, I think it's fantastic that you're having a work session today on this, and appreciate you all following up with this. I also think the work that city staff are doing on this is incredibly important and exciting. But I also think there is a part of this that to me seems like it's missing and was something highlighted in the resolution that the prior council adopted. And this is specifically council action on making changes to the traffic calming policies and the sidewalk request policies. These are policies that have long-standing issues that the council has been aware of for more than 6 years, and that we outlined in Resolution 2022-41 for change. Please make sure that when you finish the work session tonight, you've outlined a way forward to make changes to these policies. The existing policies are inequitable because they require petition processes and community votes that preference single-family homeowners. and make it difficult for people who are living in multifamily residences to request traffic calming or new sidewalks. They also encourage a resident-driven process, which benefits those who are most likely to contact city staff, instead of a process that is focused on safety, equity, and data. Additionally, they allow a small number of residents who are living near a proposed sidewalk location to veto construction of that sidewalk, even though the sidewalk would benefit the wider community and would be built on public land. Among other things, the recommendations I outlined in the letter I sent are to get rid of the petition process and make city staff-generated processes the primary method for identifying where traffic calming and new sidewalks would be located based on data, with input from residents like we get on any other issue in the city. Eliminate the community vote on whether a sidewalk should be added. This is public land, and it does not belong to the people who live near it any more than it belongs to the rest of the community. Use the public space management plan evaluation criteria to evaluate and prioritize projects. And develop plans to complete the sidewalk network so that at least one side of the street has ADA-compliant sidewalks within a half mile of sensitive community uses, which is what's identified in the public space management plan. Thank you for your work on this and other issues. I appreciate all that you're doing, and I'm happy to answer any questions as follow-ups if you have questions to my letter. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kostek, do we have any other general public comments? Come on down.
Hi, Mayor Cersei and City Council. My name is Barbara Whitney, and I live at 16 Crescent Place, and I'm here tonight to give my brief but passionate view that our loss of the Adventist Hospital, a major employer and highly valued source of health services, may just be a golden revitalization opportunity for Tacoma Park. I thank you all for your efforts to understand the very complicated nature of this opportunity, which is outside the realm of most people's expertise, and I've been working hard to try to understand all of its ramifications. Unfortunately, the Adventists themselves are not publicly sharing any plan, and no one that I know of is currently in charge, and who will step in or who will buy in, nobody knows. What does the Washington Adventist University want besides money? That's not clear. So I'm here to say, let's work to find people who are aware of really good urban development projects, which we can study and learn from before development just takes its course in Tacoma Park. Maybe we can help the Adventists find the perfect developer for a resource-rich, diverse community on the hospital site. We should be able to have an equitable and smart redevelopment, and also an inspired, visionary, and forward-looking redevelopment. Zoning should not drive it. Careful planning and execution by experts in the field should. And I'm just hoping that going forward, we can keep Tacoma Park lovable and livable. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other general public comments this evening? Okay. Do we have anyone that's signed up virtually? Okay, perfect. All right, so we're going to move on to council comments. Councilmember Small.
I defer to Councilmember Siemens.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Councilmember Small. I just wanted to call attention to an event that we're having on Monday. It's a celebration of the anniversary of benefit corporations, the legislation. That legislation was introduced and orchestrated by Congressman Jamie Raskin when he was a state senator. He was able to get that legislation through, and it has been important in providing a new business model in Maryland some 13 years ago that allows a for-profit business to have social good, to actually do social good that they commit to as part of their charter. We are celebrating that with a program that is open to entrepreneurs, local investors, and policymakers looking at how we can have stronger local economy. We have a guest speaker, Michael Schuman, who is an author and an economist. He's coming here from California to talk to us about a plan for local investment in small businesses. This is one of the challenging areas, as I think most of us know, when you're starting a business, is where do you get the money? And he has some ideas on how the local small businesses can work with the local residents and find the investors to help support their business. Anyways, there are other things going on. This is, I think, a good event for not just entrepreneurs and local investors, but also for policymakers on what we can do to kind of grease the skids in Tacoma Park for a better economy. Again, it's on Monday, October 9th at 6 p.m. right here in the council chambers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Stevens. Councilmember Small.
Thank you, Mayor. I am excited to get to discuss issues that I think are of supreme importance to the city at large now, in that we're going to talk about traffic calming and sidewalks. I will say to begin with that I echo former councilperson Kosiak's sentiments about this. The ironic and wry thing that I will say about it is that when you look at the number of pages of information that we have on tree policy, and then you look at the fact that, you know, kids are going to die on the street without better traffic calming, it does note where the priorities of previous groups of people were, even if the council was in a different place. That being said, I'm also looking forward to this because there's a really comprehensive effort in my ward to be the Democratic actors involved in trying to make a better situation for an immediate problem that's been immediate for at least 11 years. And looking through what we have currently as code or options, there are a lot of things that theoretically may have potentially been done at any given point during this process that just didn't get done. Maybe directives weren't given, whatever else. We're going to give those directives. I would reiterate there's 18,000 cars on Wildwood Avenue every week. And that was during the summer on the first day when everybody left. Or the first Monday, actually, after everybody was supposed to be on vacation. There's 8,000 cars on the other side. Those are substantive issues to a population that has a significant number, at least maybe 30 new toddlers. And so we're going to fix this. People are going to feel better about it. We're going to have both localized solutions to an immediate exigent circumstance and a broader solution that is equitable to everyone. And there will be no other option.
Thank you, Councilmember Small. Councilmember Gibson.
Yes, just briefly, if there's any Ward 3 folks, this Saturday, a piece of property, a park owned by the county off of Allegheny Avenue, known as Waldo Woods or Owl Woods and South Neighborhood Park, I think, Neighborhood Park. Anyhow, there's invasives removal from 10 to noon this Saturday. I also just want to thank both of the speakers tonight, talking about two very important subjects, and I just want to applaud both of them for their comments, which I greatly appreciate.
Councilmember Honzak.
Thank you. I also want to thank the speakers tonight, and I particularly appreciate Councilmember Kostic for bringing up issues that are really close to my heart, representing my ward and the viewpoint of equity and that lens. I took some time this week to count up the different data points on the maps that I saw, just because it wasn't easy to overlay them with the wards. There are overlays for traffic calming, and one of the data points that stood out the most to me was there was something like 56, I don't have the numbers right in front of me right now, but 50-something traffic calming, traffic bumps in Ward 1 and 7 in Ward 5. And if you look at Ward 6, I want to say it was like 30 or something. And that's not exactly the point. The point is when you then take a look at this other really great map that's just come out about pedestrian crashes that were fatal, and I messed with the map until I could see the fatal crashes, the pedestrian fatalities, that I think a lot of us know that Ward 6 comes out right on top. But the numbers are stark and they're overwhelming, and I just couldn't reiterate more what Councilmember Small said in terms of just we've got to be focused in on what a single life is worth, and I think we couldn't move any faster. We need to move faster. I'm heartened by some of the great work that has happened so far. These maps are really, really good progress to help kind of us ask ourselves those tough questions. What have we done? How fast have we done it? Have we saved a life? Could we save more over the next year if we move a little faster? So I haven't done all my homework to figure out what we can do next, but I'm eager for this conversation tonight. And on that note, I got a call from a resident that I thought was going to be able to speak tonight, but I guess he wasn't able to. His name is Alex Cruz, and he's been living in our ward since 2015 and lived his whole life in the city. And he lives off of Flower Avenue in the condos next to Totley Fraser, where we've had a lot of gunshots. And I've had a lot of folks tell me how fast people come through East Ridge Avenue next to that park where children try to play. And he had tried to gather signatures back in April. He got 50 to 60 signatures, but the number of signatures he needed to get traffic calmed on his street, as led by a resident, was too overwhelming. And so I had looped back with him this week, and he was going to come out and chat with us. Anyway, we can actually, as council, go ahead and initiate that, and I may like to discuss that with my fellow council members, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the city might do to address issues just like that one. Thank you.
Councilmember DeBala.
Thank you, Mayor. I too am looking forward to the discussion tonight and making progress on this issue. I wanted to simply flag one event coming up this weekend. The Tacoma Park Beer Fest is on Sunday. It has been renamed the Beers and Brats, and it's at the VFW, not at the Mansion. But it's, as far as I can tell, still the same old beer fest. So you can get tickets on the foundation website. You can volunteer and get in for free. Lots of ways to do this. You can get a non-alcohol drink ticket, which is cheaper, but it's all good, all for a good cause. And I wanted to flag that for folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Fulcher.
Thank you. I am excited to talk about the Safe Street stuff. I think it's a really great intersection of things that matter to us in Tacoma Park, of environmentalism and equity and safety for us to take on these issues. I also want to thank former Councilmember Kostiuk. I think that we're all in agreement about the petition process being inequitable, and we're ready to take on the responsibility of the council in figuring out how we're going to change that, and make that something that council passes some sort of resolution on, to take the onus of anybody who's really wedded to the petition process and going to be disappointed, so that they won't be waving fingers at staff. They'll be waving their fingers at us. And I want to thank you. I know that there was some concern back in October when you guys were passing the resolution that you passed, that you were passing a resolution that was going to be on the new council. And, I'm happy to pick up where you guys were leaving off. So thank you for working on that. And I've been excited to watch Lorig Charkoudian try to bring some press, I guess. I don't know. She's on her Instagram all the time, showing off how much we really need State Highway Administration to help us out with what's going on University Boulevard, because it's crazy over there. And so I appreciate that she's been doing that. I want to thank Barbara Whitney for coming and, talking about how important the development is going to be going on in the Washington Adventist site. We do deserve something special over there. And one thing that I think that we haven't really talked about is that the university does want to be there. And so I think that we're also going to see some investment from the university in that site as well, not just things that everybody else wants to see, but things that the university would like to have there. And I will also be at the Tacoma Foundation event this weekend, volunteering and pouring beer. So I hope I see a lot of you there. Thank you.
Mayor, one point of order. That's for her sister more than anything else. No, really, I did want to also give a profound shout out to the people at Tacoma Torch who sponsored a hot dog contest during the Tacoma Day. I unfortunately had an expelling of hot dogs. I would like to say that I think I was set up by the police in advance because right at the point where I had caught the previous champion with my first hot dog, I believe actually, a police officer just randomly shouts, "If you lose, you're fired." And so I thought that was funny, and then I had hot dogs in my nose. So I, of course, had to expel my hot dogs, but I did dap up the police officer because it was hysterical, and it was a lot of fun. And it's one of those things about being here that's really funny because I can like make jokes about the fact that the police would set me up because the police here would never set me up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Small. So I too want to send my appreciation to those that have come out to provide comments tonight. We really do appreciate every single one of you who come out to share your thoughts, who provide your comments in writing. It really does help to inform the policy paths forward. So thank you to our speakers tonight. I will pick up where Councilmember Small left off in terms of the Street Fest. I had the opportunity to attend the Tacoma Street Fest this weekend, and it was amazing. I want to thank our staff. I don't think people realize how many departments invest time and energy into attending these types of events on the weekend, right? So special appreciation to our police department, our library department. I saw members of Public Works that were there. Our recreation department was there. Our planning, HCD, was there because it really does demonstrate the commitment that our staff have to serving our community. You know, I bring this up a lot because, you know, for a lot of people who work 9-to-5 jobs, the weekends are supposed to be your time. And in the city of Tacoma Park, we have staff that are consistently and regularly devoting time on the weekends, at night, to really try to make sure that the residents of the city are taken care of. So I do just want to thank our staff, yes, for all of the wonderful work that you all do. And all of the hard work that everyone put in terms of representing the city during the Street Fest. I also want to thank the Montgomery Energy Connection. They came out to Totally Fraser Park on Saturday and passed out, and I left my bag at home, but they passed out, they had lots of kid events and engagement activities for the youth that were at the playground. They also brought out Black-owned energy efficient light bulbs, which is awesome. Really? Yes. Yes. They're awesome. I had the bag, but unfortunately I left it at home. But I just want to thank the staff that came out. They were truly, truly, truly wonderful and definitely worked well with the youth that were in attendance. And so I definitely want to send my appreciation to them, as well as the organizers of the Sweep the Creek. I know that there were a lot of folks that were out this weekend that were also helping to improve the cleanliness of our parks. So thank you all so much. Lastly, just want a shameless plug for the Ann Street Farmers Market on Wednesdays. Definitely want to encourage folks to come out. Wonderful food, excellent vegetables, wonderful way to spend a lunch on a weekday. So I want to encourage folks to come out and do that. And I think that is all I have, other than I now have beer and brats on my calendar. Yes, thank you. Because unfortunately, I did not have it on my calendar, but I do now. So I will see folks out at the Tacoma Foundation event this weekend. And with that, I am going to turn things over to.
Point of order. May I say one more thank you?
Sure.
Are you
Sure, go right
you
ahead.
done? No, thank you. I forgot a very important thank you from the totally set of events throughout the whole month of September, because I just realized we've actually come to the end of the month. And the September 30th event that the mayor mentioned, which was on a Saturday, was the end of a 4-week series of events at Totally Fraser Park. And I want to explicitly express my gratitude to the City of Tacoma Park Library that came out to the park twice and had a really nice showing of families and children up in the north end of the city. And I really, really hope this is the beginning of something that can go on into the future. It really helped to make that park so wonderful and beautiful. We have lots of beautiful pictures if anybody wants to see them. And was culminating in this energy event. And then I also want to thank the resident who spent lots of volunteer hours, Brittany Baker, who helped to make that whole series happen. So thank you for letting me do that.
No worries.
I'm sorry. I also have another point.
Go
of
right
order.
ahead.
Sorry, I have a point of order. It seemed like a big deal to me this week. I was, sad to hear about Dianne Feinstein's passing. But LaFonza Butler is going to be the 3rd Black woman to serve in the Senate. And it's astounding to me that we're only on the 3rd Black woman to serve in the Senate. And so, once again, another reason that I'm really excited to serve with the first Black mayor of Tacoma Park.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Fulcher. And so with that, I'll turn things over to our acting deputy city manager, Mr. Bodick, to go through the city manager comments.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I too went to the Street Fest, but not as a staff member. I took my nephew from DC for his first experience, and he was incredibly impressed. He's like, I've never been to Tacoma Park, but what a cool community. And anyway, I also enjoyed the time there. He's 26, so yeah, he's in that point where he's thinking, where next. I also took the Golden Doodle. So it was a good time. I had a great banh mi sandwich. So a reminder on a couple of events. We have tomorrow the rescheduled Montgomery College Facilities Master Plan public meeting that will be virtual at 6:30. A link to it will be included in the city manager comments. It's also been included in the past few if it's not up early tomorrow. Also tomorrow at 7 p.m., Code Enforcement presents Zero Waste Talk by Stephanie Miller. That will be here in the Tacoma Park Community Center. Also tomorrow, Curving Lines art opening. If you had a chance to walk around the building, we have a new art exhibit, and the opening for that official opening will be 7:30 here in Tacoma in the Community Center. I mentioned this last week, but Montgomery Parks is conducting an online survey seeking community input on the renovation of Jessup Blair Park. At 15 acres, Jessup Blair Park is the largest park in downtown Silver Spring. It is located near the DC line and bordered by Georgia Avenue, CHX, Transit Railroad tracks, Blair Road, and Jessup Blair Drive. The park currently has a playground, soccer field, lighted tennis and basketball courts, picnic areas, and the historic Jessup Blair House. Planners are hoping to increase use of the space by developing a park for all that appeals to a diverse group of park users with varying interests, abilities, and ages. Check the Jessup Blair project page on Montgomery Park's website for this quick 15-question survey. A link will also be posted in manager comments tomorrow. I've also mentioned this at a prior meeting, but there's a couple of RFQs currently out the tenant opportunity to purchase TOPL requests. HCD has released 2 of these. The first seeks responses from qualified nonprofit and mission-oriented for-profit developers with strong affordable housing track records and demonstrated experience in acquiring, owning, operating, rehabilitating, and developing quality rental and/or homeownership housing with affordability covenants, who are interested in serving in a pool of qualified parties to serve as assignees or designees as part of the city's right of first refusal through the city's tenant opportunity to purchase law. And the second seeks qualified nonprofit technical assistance provider to assist local tenant associations with organizing and identifying the feasibility of purchasing their properties through this program. Those will both remain open through January 2024. And finally, Direct Cash Assistance Program. We're trying to do a last media and communications push right now. As you know, Council approved kind of closing the plan as of October 1st, and we'll be back November 1st to talk about next steps. But there's an alert on the website that identifies clearly the expiration date. Blog with outlined in-person events. There'll be an in-person event at the Maple Lab Block Party, which will be October 14th. We'll have staff set up and some volunteers who have graciously agreed to help individuals sign in person. Social media, Tacoma Insider. It'll be announced on the radio show, digital signage here, as well as an email to property managers and assistant property managers with flyers posted. So that is all I have for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to move into our work sessions for this evening. The first item is a request to close Ann Street for a Historic Heritage Month event on October the 22nd. And so I will turn this over to Acting Deputy City Manager Boda.
Excuse me. And I will turn this right over to our acting director of HCD, Ira Keller.
And I'll turn it over to no one. So, Mayor, members of council.
It stops with you, man.
Ira Keller, acting director, Housing and Community.
Okay, Ira, let's give you 1 second. I think we're dealing with some sound issues here.
Oh,
Can you try speaking again so we can make sure that we can hear you in the room?
sure. How about now?
Much better. Thank you.
I made a very funny joke that you all missed, which is very upsetting for me. But Madam Mayor, members of council, pleasure to see you all tonight. Ira Keller, acting director, Housing and Community Development, here tonight to present a work session for your consideration for a resolution for a temporary closure of Ann Street in support of an event on October 22nd that is being sponsored to support Hispanic Heritage Month. This is an event that will be sponsored by the Tacoma Langley Crossroads Development Authority, but was actually put together by several of the vendors who participate in the Crossroads Farmers Market on Wednesdays. So this event will be held in the same location as the Crossroads Farmers Market and will include food vendors, music and entertainment. And as I'm sure you're all aware, but just as a reminder, we like to take these kind of event street closures when we have the time to council for your consideration to pass a resolution in support and allow us to close the street. So happy to answer any questions on the event. Again, this will be Sunday, October 22nd. The event itself will be from 10 to 3 p.m., 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., excuse me. And the proposed closure will be on Ann Street between Hammond and University Boulevard.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. Councilmember Small.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions here that are related, I believe. The first one is, if the Crossroads Development Authority is the sponsor, and we have the unfortunate misfortune of no longer having the best employee in the world working for them, is there a particular point person within the city staff that is taking over ostensibly the short-term requirements of that role? Because as an ex officio member of that organization, I would like to impress the importance of it. And I think that isn't tangential, because I do think it may have to do with some logistics on the ground during the festival. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, certainly. So it's a somewhat unique situation here because as I believe we all recall, I believe it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago that we kind of thanked Kaylee for her service as executive director. So the Crossroads does have an interim executive director, Laura Carrillo, who we have been working very closely with as staff to both kind of support her in the interim role, as well as kind of provide resources and assistance around this event. So this event really is a partnership between Laura in her interim capacity with the Crossroads, as well as, again, some vendors who are intimately familiar with the Crossroads from their experience in the Crossroads Farmers Market. So certainly we're providing a lot of support in terms of kind of how to put on this event, what needs to happen, what setup and breakdown and liability coverage is needed. And so, yeah, we as staff have been working very closely with Ms. Carrillo and feel confident in the success of this event.
I have no larger concerns about it. It's a tight ship over there. The other thing that I was curious about from your perspective, since it is tangential to the conversation we're about to have, is the long-term closure of Ann as a viable option for allowing for either open street type things or a different sort of creation of a third space or something like that. And I'm curious to know what your opinion is on it while I have you on the chopping block or whatever you would call this.
Yeah, happy to speak to it a little bit. Yeah, I think that one of the great things and one of the really big successes for the Crossroads has been the success of the farmers market on Ann Street. And really what the farmers market has done is it's provided kind of a proof of concept for using that street and closing that street and using it for events and pedestrian-friendly activities. And we've seen a huge growth in kind of events like this that have happened on Ann Street because of that success. And yeah, I think it's an important opportunity for us to explore more. One challenge I will say is that some of the businesses along University Boulevard, the main access point for those businesses actually is on Ann Street. So while a closure of that block would be really interesting to consider, and I think would have a lot of support, there would be some kind of logistical issues we'd need to figure out, especially with Purple Line construction on University impacting kind of the front of those businesses already. Kind of how do you allow for ingress and egress for businesses that do have a lot of kind of vehicular customers and vehicular clientele coming in.
Thanks, Ira.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, not seeing any more lights, I am excited. I live near the street, and I love whenever we have the opportunities to activate and have community-wide events in segments of our community that don't typically get to see a lot of those. And I think that all of our partners, Crossroads Food Network, the Tacoma Langley Crossroads Development Authority, have just done so much work to really move forward in terms of creating an active, lively segment of our community that doesn't have those kinds of things regularly. So I am in full support of us moving forward on this street closure, and definitely appreciate Laura and all of her work and kind of stepping in with Kaylee's departure to continue to leverage this space and activate this space in a way that the community desperately needs. So I'm game. So for folks on council, just so you know, there will be a resolution that will be coming.
I thought we were moving. I was going to move.
No, this is just a work session. So for members of council, the next step will be a resolution that we will vote on next week. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move on to the next work session. Is the presentation on the Complete Safe Streets, update on pedestrian transportation safety recommendations. And so with that, I will turn things over back to Mr. Bodek, because I'm not sure who's presenting. but I see Alex standing, so I'm thinking you're going to be the presenter. Awesome.
Yeah. All right, go ahead, Alex. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Good evening. My name is Alex, and I am the planner for the City of Tacoma Park. I am joined by colleagues from the Planning Division, the Department of Public Works, and the Police Department to share an update on pedestrian and transportation safety initiatives. Before I start with updates on current initiatives and progress, I wanted to share a little bit of background on a number of City Council actions that have informed where we are today on some of these issues. Dating back to 2003, that was when the first administrative regulation was developed for the traffic calming process that we see today. In 2010, a process for prioritizing sidewalk installation and bringing them up to ADA compliance was also initiated through a resolution. Then in 2012, a new process was set in place for new sidewalk design and installation that was different from the traffic calming process. In 2015, there was a tweak to that process, adding a few extra stipulations. And then in 2022, in response to what we're talking about today, the last City Council passed a resolution on pedestrian and transportation safety. This presentation was created in response to a request for staff to respond to draft recommendations from the Complete and Safe Streets Committee's findings. Those were released in January 2021, but were never adopted by the City Council. And then more recently in 2023, there was a request for us to come back and give an update built into this resolution about traffic calming on a block of 2nd Avenue. So over the last couple of years in particular, the joint efforts of HCD, police, and public works have strived to approach pedestrian and traffic safety projects comprehensively. In particular, we generally take an approach that follows the following line of thought. First, we identify the problem at hand. At that point, we layer into our analysis considerations for racial equity, and then staffing capacity and limitations, and then budget constraints. Especially due to the last two factors, we are not always able to move as promptly on all the issues that we've identified as we would like to. So, the next 7 slides, or 6 slides, 7 points, are pulling out the specific requests from the Council Resolution 2022-41. And so I'll address each of those in certain ways that city staff are addressing some of these issues and where there's still progress to be made. So the first one was, and if you'll excuse me, I'm going to move. There's windows blocking my screen here. There you go. So the first request of the council was to prioritize safety and equity in decision-making processes and planning, which is a sort of broad request. And this is an ongoing effort that I can speak firmly to in the planning division, but also more broadly in HCD and our partnerships with Public Works and the police is an ongoing effort, and it's something that we will keep working toward. In particular, I wanted to use this as a moment to point out that the draft public space management plan is going to be coming before you. I will be standing here again in 2 weeks for a work session. And a lot of the components of that plan involve taking a very specific and prioritized look at how equity and safety go into our decision-making processes, and many of those touch on a lot of pedestrian safety and traffic safety initiatives. Also related to the equity component of this, the Government Alliance for Race and Equity is providing a training for senior staff members in the city building. That is a second round of something that was done a number of years ago. Leadership within our departments is really taking seriously the notion that we need to build racial equity in particular into all of the actions that we take. The second point was to emphasize the well-being and safety of the most vulnerable roadway users and prioritize the best use of the public space for the community as a whole. A lot of what we do, all of the projects that we focus on in planning are really emphasizing how do we add infrastructure that supports vulnerable road users. So in particular, we have a growing number of bikeways projects that are in the works right now. We have the New Ave Bikeway, which extends down New Hampshire Avenue from Holton Lane to the DC border, divided into sections A, B, and D. Sections A and B are in their final months of design. We're just haggling with the public utilities right now to get those final approvals. And section D just completed its preliminary design work. We also have a really unique resource in the Metropolitan Branch Trail, which is currently this city's second of two separated multi-use bike trail. Our public works team is scheduled to perform some intermediary patching and repair work for upheaved asphalt this winter. And in addition to that, we just received a grant. We're notified that we have been awarded a grant, so it is not signed, sealed, and delivered just yet, but that will allow us to pursue 100% design for a full upgrade of that trail to a sort of modern standard of best practice. We also have the Maple Avenue Connectivity Project, which is just getting back into the flow of things. We've been doing over the past 2 months a whole bunch of pop-up community engagement events that I'm excited to share more about at a future time. And then we were notified just a couple weeks ago that the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, MNCPPC, received a large bucket of money from the, I think it was through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, but it's going to look at improving almost all of the trail crossings in Tacoma Park where Sligo Creek crosses roadways. So we're really excited that we were able to advocate for those to get onto the menu. And then in addition to that, our Public Works Department has an ongoing project, as was mentioned before in one of the resolutions, to upgrade all of the city's sidewalks to become ADA compliant. At present, we are at 87% completion for all existing sidewalks. Also, since 2012, Public Works has installed over nearly 19,000 linear feet of new sidewalk around the city, so that's separate from the ADA upgrades. And then we have a new Safe Routes to School coordinator, Casey, who some of you have had the pleasure to meet thus far, and she has been conducting walking audits with all of the public school partners that we have, looking at the areas around each school and where there are opportunities for us to think of new ways to approach creating safer routes for students and families walking to school. The third point was to utilize data-driven criteria for evaluating and prioritizing sidewalk and traffic calming installations and other traffic calming approaches such as reduced speed limits as allowed by state law, and for planning and identifying where safety measures are needed. So one of the first strategies that's been taken on is that Public Works has started creating maps of all of our traffic calming installations. I think they were mentioned earlier by Councilmember Hanzak. And those are a new feature for us. They're being posted online, and we're continuing to explore what ways we can play with that data and display it easily for public consumption. Also, over the specifically relating to speed limits, Maryland House Bill 562 was passed in 2021 to allow jurisdictions to lower their speed limits to as little as 15 miles per hour under certain conditions. City staff from Police, Public Works, and HCD have analyzed this policy with each other and in conversation with peer jurisdictions. Staff have come to the conclusion that it's a really important tool for us to have available to in our back pockets, but the utilization of this policy requires certain conditions that are not applicable to most of the city streets where we have control over the design and implementation. We, as a team, were not able to identify any roadways within the city's control, so that excludes all the SHA roadways, University, Philadelphia, Ethan Allen, etc., where a decrease from 25 miles per hour to 20 or 15 miles per hour would create a significant behavior change, which ultimately we see as the goal of any traffic calming initiative, is to change behavior that improves safety. So we have Chief Duvall with us this evening online, and he will be available at the end of the presentation to answer more questions about the specifics of this. An exception to that rule, though, is that separate from the state law that was passed in 2021, the cities may implement school zones which do decrease speed limits to 15 miles per hour, and that's a process that can be done fully in-house. And right now we have a few school zones, including one on Maple Avenue for the blocks in front of Piney Branch Elementary School and one on Holly Avenue. But interestingly, there's no school zone designation for the streets that abut the middle school. So more on that later. And then I also wanted to point out, as far as data-driven considerations go, Montgomery County has a variety of planning documents and initiatives that do apply to the city, including their Vision Zero action plans, their bicycle master plan, and the pedestrian master plan, which is currently in development and getting close to completion. The fourth point was to allow multiple avenues for initiating consideration of locations that may need traffic calming or sidewalks, speed limit reductions, or other measures. So we just wanted to point out that at present, there's two current processes, one for requesting new sidewalks that can be initiated by one or more residents, one or more council members, or the city manager, and can be done so via email to the city's Public Works Department. For requests for traffic calming as established in the administrative regulation that I mentioned earlier, that requires a petition and a community meeting to initiate the request. So just to be clear about what's in place right now, that said, one of the recommendations within the Public Space Management Plan is to update these processes. And as former council member Kostick mentioned in her comments, we are really excited to tackle these. And so because the Public Space Management Plan has gotten delayed in its sort of final passage, staff have started taking it upon ourselves to start drafting alternative policies for this. They're not quite at the stage where we're ready to roll them out to everybody yet, but to the point that we are internally prioritizing this as something that is really doable. It doesn't require a lot of extra staffing or external expertise to develop, and it's something I think that's really doable. I'm happy to answer questions about that later, but it's not fully baked for public consumption just yet. And then the fifth point was to consider holistic approaches to addressing larger geographic areas, including the investigation of reduced speed limits and the integration of other city plans and priorities such as sustainability efforts, public art initiatives, and other projects. When we interpreted this, we really focused in on the idea around holistic approaches to addressing larger geographic areas, and I think some of that is that the processes that we have that exist right now are very hyper-localized and don't always offer the flexibility or invitation to look at a broader geography for what the impacts are and the overflow impacts or the unexpected impacts. So as an example of and it's worth noting that depending on how big that geography, the bigger it gets, the harder it gets to actualize in a concise manner. But an example of a project that is just getting started, we received a sidewalk request for new sidewalks on Darwin Avenue, and by we, I mean the Public Works Department. As that process is being commenced, we are starting to think about what are some other things we can do to think about maybe instead of just focusing on a sidewalk, what if we focused on this entire area as a more consolidated school zone? Instead of a patchwork of small school zone designations, what if we looked at something a little more expansive that goes perhaps up Grant or perhaps encompasses some larger amount of that neighborhood? That's just in its very nascent ideation stages, but you know, when we look at sidewalk requests, it felt like to staff that only focusing on the sidewalk and then walking away and saying job's done didn't feel adequate, especially at this location that we hear very regularly from parents and school administrators just is a headache for a variety of reasons and a safety hazard. It is also worth noting that the larger the geographic area, the more it extends beyond our internal staff capacity to conduct some of the analyses. So additional analyses in many cases require technical assistance or external consultants, and those require funding or supplementary staffing. The sixth point was to make progress toward a more comprehensive approach to transportation and public space planning that prioritizes pedestrian and non-vehicle safety. I think, again, we're going to see a lot of those themes coming up when I come back to present about the public space management plan. I also, our public works team felt that this was a good place to insert thinking about sort of using best practices as a, instead of going except street by street or project by project and looking at exceptions here and exceptions there, trying to start to create a set of standards for some of the things that in the past we have been a little bit more tailored. And one of those is that moving forward, the city plans to use only for new speed bumps that are installed the standardized Montgomery County speed hump design. A lot of, we hear regularly from people that the extremely unique version of speed bumps that we have, especially in a lot of Ward 1, they just defy best practices across the country. And instead of fighting, and it's hard for us to find contractors who will help install them or design them because they're so unique and unusual. So moving forward, taking the highest and best practice that's been outlaid by the county and using their standard design practice will be both easier for us to implement on a faster and more regular basis, and also sort of brings us up to like a consistent standard of safety. And then finally, there was a last point that City Council, I sort of abbreviated it because it was kind of long, but the big takeaway was City Council would like to make sure that staff and council members are meeting regularly with SHA. You know, so as I mentioned before, so many of our roads and all of our most dangerous roads are owned and managed by the State Highway Administration. So in the last year, we have started up a much more regular scheduled series of talks with SHA. We're meeting on a quarterly basis, some of which is staff to staff and some of which is inviting council members. At this point, it's roughly like half and half of our meetings. And some of the things that we've been able to achieve through that are the 2 permanent always stop sign installations at Carroll Avenue and Lincoln, and Ethan Allen and Elm. Both of those have received permanent designation by State Highway. That is in no small part to residents also really pushing hard for those, because we as staff have been asking for some influence there for a long time, so I have to give some credit to our community members who really helped push those across the finish line, but meeting regularly helped us really seal the deal on that. Also, there's a rapid flashing beacon approved for Philadelphia Avenue and Chicago Avenue that the state is going to be working to install in the next series of months. There's currently a Carroll Avenue repaving project that's going on, and as part of that, they're redoing all of the curb ramps along Carroll Avenue to be ADA compliant. So you may have noticed there's a lot of construction going on Carroll, but also a lot of new slick concrete work happening. Also, as part of that and as a direct request that we were able to make of them, they've agreed to reduce the speed limit on Carroll Avenue between Flower and University Boulevard, which for no particularly obvious reason was higher than everywhere else that it was throughout the city. So it will be brought down to 25 miles per hour like the rest of the corridor. And then also the intersection at Flower and Carroll as sort of a separate project to redesign that intersection in a variety of ways was funded for design work. So we're excited to continue working with them to push for that project. I wanted to take a quick minute to reiterate some of the county and state safety efforts that are informing the work we do. The following plans and policies all include Tacoma Park within their purview, and their goals and recommendations guide the work that we do in our departments. We have been an active stakeholder in their development, or many of their developments, and their adoption by the county council mandates many of their policies are required to be within projects within the city. And so these include two sort of mapping analyses that we've found to be really helpful. There's an interactive crash data map available online that shows crash data across the city. There's also a predictive safety analysis that the county did that I find to be really impressive. Unfortunately, a lot of where it shows predictions for where we could head off safety of the past are on State Highway Administration maintained roads. There is a bicycle master plan that maps out strong goals for a bike network that extends through Tacoma Park and connects to its neighboring jurisdictions, as well as a Vision Zero action plan that the county passed. They have, as we are a member of the county, we are subject to their Vision Zero efforts, and we are, included in their considerations for action steps. We also have, as we are all very familiar with, the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan is underway. That involves a variety of transportation-related initiatives. A pedestrian master plan by the county is also underway. That also, I feel like, has a lot of really incredible goals and policy proposals, some of which we've already started holding on to in our internal work. And then the Ride-On bus system is underway for the Ride-On Reimagined study, which is looking at the bus networks across the county. And there are some tweaks proposed to some of the routes in Tacoma Park to try and provide more service, more frequent service, more consistent service, and reduce some of the redundancy on some of those routes. And we're actively engaging with them on that. And then also there's the House bill that I mentioned, which allows for the city to lower speed limits to as low as 15 miles per hour. So what are some next steps? The first one would be to review and adopt the public space management plan when it comes up in the next couple weeks. Part of this is because it creates a framework and sets a direction for staff to pursue a holistic approach to many of these pedestrian safety issues. And I think for a lot of these initiatives, having council direction gives us a little bit more free rein to grab the bull by the horns and start making some progress on some things that we've been kind of in stasis before this plan's adoption has allowed. The second would be that additional staffing or funds to support consulting services is required to advance some of these goals beyond the current pace of implementation, specifically for more comprehensive data collection, analysis, and enforcement. And then the third one is expand the existing school zone near Tacoma Park Elementary and middle schools, which would result in the reduction of speed limit in that area to 15 miles per hour. Again, this would allow us to exploit or utilize a tool that doesn't require the same level of extra stuff that the state law would ask of us, and also feels like it really prioritizes a vulnerable community that we have been hearing about wanting more protection for a while now. So with that, that is my presentation. I am here to answer questions. I also have on hand with me Director Braithwaite and Chief Duvall, I believe is online. So we are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Freeman, for your presentation. It's been really, really helpful. You kind of stole my thunder a little bit because one of the first things I wanted to ask for of staff is one of the big priorities for this council is trying to move towards a data-driven, evidence-based approach for identifying areas where traffic calming is needed, so that we could get out of this cycle of petition-based approaches. And it sounds like, to some degree, staff has already started to identify potential approaches that we could take to move in that direction. Understanding that the logistics of it all is not ready for prime time. Can you walk us through generally, because you said it should be a relatively low lift, can you just generally walk us through the process of what something like that would entail? So it would be coming to council, presenting those options, and then it sounds like there's some things that are more like in the admin regs that would need to be tweaked.
Yeah, and it sort of depends a little bit on the form that the final piece takes. If it's based on resolution alone, like the traffic calming process, if we wanted to build it more into the admin regs, which is a slightly more involved process that I'm not going to pretend to know the total ins and outs of just yet. But yes, I think that the process you described was right, and that and when I say that it's an easier lift, in part because I think that we have within staff all of the tools and capabilities to craft a policy, and then it's a matter of bringing it before you all to see if it works and make any adjustments and seek approval.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would like to move that we expedite that that approach.
Second.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Small.
I said it that way.
All right, is every? Kind of want to finish my sentence though. But if we can expedite, that process, keeping in mind, of course, that you all are knee deep in the public space management plan, and aspects of the public space management plan is really critical to informing this process, barring we stop you in terms of the public space management plan, that we could make this a priority for this group to come back to council around addressing this aspect of the traffic calming process so that we can get that on the books. Again, the fingers crossed, the aspects, and we're all learning more, and I think we're all scheduled for different presentations around the public space management plan, the criteria that is being proposed there. But if we can expedite this piece after we get that approval in the next couple of weeks, so that by early, I'll give everybody a break, but I want to make sure we're able to get this on the agenda. I don't know what's going on with mics. I want to make sure that we're able to get this on the agenda for maybe January of next year at the latest. So keeping in mind that there may be some regs and we need to follow up with the city attorney, I want to make sure that we're able to start having these conversations. So can you all tell me whether or not that would be doable?
Traffic safety and sidewalks?
Traffic safety, traffic calming petition, policies and procedures process.
The sidewalks? Or not?
The sidewalks, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, in my understanding of what was described today, the traffic calming is different from the sidewalk process, and that the sidewalk process allows for non-petition approaches to requesting sidewalks.
All right.
However, traffic calming does not.
Yeah, though I would also expound on that too. I think what would be helpful this evening is to hear if council or council members have particular aspects of the current process that you would like to see most changed. We've certainly heard about the petition process. Councilmember Kostek, former Councilmember Kostek, raised the issue of the public vote, which is currently baked into the sidewalk process. So it would be helpful to hear if there's any consensus or any sort of general thoughts on the part of council. The system we have, we know, and we know what works well and what, doesn't work well. There's a lot to be said for the petition process in that it fosters communication among a neighborhood. And we've all been in situations where the city staff come in with a suggestion and it just blows up because it didn't come from the neighborhood. So, we need to sort of keep that in mind and figure out what the appropriate balance was. That being said, I think, it's really critical to get the public space management plan laid out, and we really need to grow these changes from that as the basis. It's possible for us to come back in January, I would think, with some suggestions and recommendations, though it would be very, very helpful to have either a subgroup of the council or this evening hear from people that, the council member in terms of what you would most like to see changed, whether you'd like them to be on separate tracks, one group altogether. One of the things that we need to be aware of is the time it takes, particularly sidewalk processes, to run through there. And those of you on council who have sat through community meetings, it's very time intensive because it is very baked into the neighborhood. Traffic calming a little less so, but I think it would be improved and enhanced by creating more of a neighborhood approach. With that, we have no dedicated staff on the police department that gather data. We have no dedicated staff in the planning department that help to plan, this sort of vision, this network. We have no dedicated staff in public works that specific focus is traffic engineering. If the city wants to get serious, and part of its changes needs to be looking at additional staff or funding, not to beat the drum, but my budget for sidewalks and traffic calming has been reduced the last few years. So we've been able to do a tremendous amount, and we've got projects in the queue waiting to go, but we lost funding.
Right.
So that, it's always a balancing act. Not saying these are easy decisions, but we need to sort of figure out if we really open up the process. People can call us up and say, hey, we want traffic calming, and we expect the city staff response. We really need to look at staffing levels and funding capacity for that. I don't know if Roz, you had more.
I'm just echoing and adding to, I guess, but planning has a whole lot that will be in front of you this fall, that has been in front of you for the last several months, in case you haven't noticed. And so right now on our plates, we've got the public space management plan, which will be in front of you in 2 weeks and the following week. We have the kickoff of the new grant cycle and reboot, as we're calling it, of the Maple Avenue Connectivity Project, starting now. We have new grants coming in, which is wonderful news, but workload. We have the minor master plan, which of course will continue to require our attention and feedback and reporting out to council. So I just caution, we kind of need to sit down and look at this whole picture and make sure that we can meet those commitments.
Okay. Thank you for that. And one of the things that came to mind, it was actually a second question about the data piece. So thank you so much, Director Braithwaite, for bringing that up, because I know that that's one of the big issues as well, just in terms of not only staff capacity, but the technology, the availability of the technology that we currently have, like the number of counters that we have, the number, we're often asked by residents to do things like traffic studies, but those are quite costly, and we don't actually have the staff nor the technology readily available to do those things in-house. So I hear you in terms of not being ready for implementation, but I do think it would be helpful for us to have another work session in January, with the preparation being, here are some options that we could take after gathering the information from members and my colleagues that are happy to share their thoughts today. And we can also have develop a process for members of council to share their concerns or their thoughts with you all separately offline. But also, what are the needs that we have to have, and what are the things that we need in order to address this? And I'm pushing January because I want to make sure that we know what those things are, and you get that council feedback as we are entering into budget season. Because I don't think it's fair for us to continue to ask for this time after time after time, and not have a full understanding of all of the resources that are needed to execute well. So I do, and I'll work with city management and the city clerk so that we can make sure we work with you all to have you all come back in January so we can have a more thorough discussion around possible approaches to address some of the challenges with the traffic calming process. We can throw sidewalks in there if we have to. And also, what are some of the fiscal needs in order to properly address them? One other thing that has plagued, I know, Ward 6 and where I live, and I'm sure my area is not alone, is volume, right? So we talk a lot about speed and trying to slow people down, which is often what the traffic calming can help do. But for large segments of our community, it's an issue of volume. Our neighborhoods, it could be artificial because of things like Purple Line construction, or it could become a new normal for us in a post-pandemic as people are starting to go back to work, that folks are using city streets as mechanisms to bypass state highway roads. I'm thinking of Erskine, I'm thinking of Wildwood and Glenside, a number of these smaller residential streets that were never really built to serve as an alternative to University Boulevard or New Hampshire Avenue. So to what extent do we have, if anything, the capability to explore volume as well in terms of data? And it's okay to say we don't.
We do.
No.
That is the elephant in the room, and a growing one at that. We first need to step back a bit to see what is it that we're doing or can do to enhance non-vehicle use, right? And I think the city has done an incredible job and is continuing to on pedestrian safety with the ADA work and the new sidewalk work. We've connected places over the past 10 years that didn't have sidewalks before. Ward 6 is kind of the biggest example of that. More sidewalks have been built in Ward 6 than any other ward, followed closely by Ward 2 and then Ward 3. So they were areas that were neglected in the sidewalks in the past. So a lot of that equity work and analysis work and need, that's where that work has started. But my point was, you create sidewalks so people have a place to walk and not be in their car. You create safe bike lanes so you encourage people to bike and not be in their car. You create a bus network, and where, we have a very good bus network in Ride-On and WMATA, and the city has done an enormous amount of work to try to make that more pleasant in terms of bike shelters and the pedestrian paths and the access. So you've got to have that going. So you're fostering alternative modes. And then you're left with, how do you keep the cars from cutting through the neighborhoods? They need to stay on the main roads. They need to stay on the state highways. And again, using Ward 6 as an example of that, you need to keep cars on New Hampshire Avenue and University Boulevard. How are you going to do that? You have to make it very restrictive, which again gets into some very touchy conversations. They are public roads. You can make roads one way. You can restrict access during times. You can restrict turns. Again, there's an enforcement component to that. But the one thing that's guaranteed is you're going to affect everybody. You're going to affect the people who live on those streets as well as those folks who would like to use your street as a cut-through. So there's other examples around the city. But if you look at neighborhoods that have dealt with this, and I'm not in Tacoma Park, but outside, I'm thinking Bethesda in a big and major way. If you look at neighborhoods that have dealt with cut-through traffic in a draconian way, a very effective way, it's restrictions, one-ways, road closed, incomplete access routes, so you can no longer drive smoothly from one end to the other. And you can do that in places where you have state roadway that you're trying to encourage vehicles to stay in. So you've got to provide alternate routes. You have to do the traffic calming on the existing routes, but then you have to look at those more severe methods of keeping cut-through traffic on the state roads.
And to do those types of approaches, as we talk about those holistic approaches, is that like a traffic study? I mean, keeping in mind that there's now so much more resources. And again, I know we're staff strapped, right? Requesting and trying to go after grant money takes staff time, and having to try to do all of the reporting with grant money takes staff time. I fully understand that. But is that something that, again, would have to be pushing towards obtaining grant funds to help support those types of more holistic traffic studies that could really look at volume and traffic flow in order to come up with those approaches?
Yeah, I think funding is the big issue with that, and finding sources of funding, whether or not through the county's programs. There may be grant funding available, or through state programs. I'm not aware, but we can certainly look into that and see. When you're starting to approach that, those kind of measures, you really do feel like you want a full analysis of a neighborhood approach, because we all know that if you made if you make a street one way and half the cars can no longer travel on it, they're going to go to the next street. So you're going to have this domino effect of pushing cars from one street to another. So you need to take a holistic approach based on a neighborhood, and you need to have the community involved, because this, again, affects everybody every day, even those folks who live there, in the desire to reduce the amount of cut-through traffic. You're also affecting people's day-to-day travel routes.
Yeah.
So yeah, funding is a big part of it. We will definitely need traffic engineering assistance, data analysis, just gathering data analysis. You can do that contractually. The city just has a limited number of traffic counters and isn't able to do the full-blown analysis of traffic engineering that some of you may remember when the city did neighborhood approaches before, in New Hampshire Gardens and a couple other neighborhoods. So it's a major lift for technical support and funding, and there are definitely going to be unintended consequences and kind of cascading impacts. There may be some neighborhoods that just work in and of themselves and can be more easily designed around, but there are others where it's a little more complicated.
Okay, so thank you so much. So there's a motion on the floor to have staff come back to us in January.
Second.
You already seconded it.
Oh, I didn't know. Well, you stopped me before I didn't know about it. Yeah.
Let me just finish what this motion is about. So it is to have our staff come back to us in January to present to council the proposed options for addressing the data-driven needs of traffic calming, identification, and as Councilmember DeBall said, and sidewalks, including, but not limited to, proposed options that you all come up with in terms of how we may be able to address them, but as well as the financial needs that staff have in order to implement any proposals or recommendations that you have on how we may be able to address these issues.
Friendly amendment, Mayor, including staff person,
Yes,
including staffing.
agreed. Okay, I think Councilmember Small,
Yes.
did you have a question on that?
Many
Many.
minutes ago,
No,
actually,
no,
and then you
it's my
got
turn.
into
It's my
the
turn.
question about data
my turn.
collection and the
my turn.
costs that come to that. I just wanted to say two things. One is
I'm
that,
so
It is
sorry,
my
Councilmember
turn.
Gibson, but your after Councilmember Small's light was first. Did you have an amendment or a friendly amendment or anything on the resolution that
I guess
the
I-
motion that just
I
went
actually
forward?
had this on, but sure.
Okay.
Yes, I do have a friend, and that would be that we would have it that we would have it before December, because our budget subcommittee is recommending that we look at budget priorities this calendar year before we go into next year. So it's a suggestion that we make it December.
Hear you, Councilmember Gibson. So I would like for us, because I know that we're talking about the budget calendar next week, can we, what we will do is adjust the date of this presentation pending having a additional understanding of finalization of the budget calendar. I will say, I think that we will be okay, because I am very mindful of this team and the fact that they are going to be dealing with the minor master plan. They are going to be dealing with the public space management plan. And so I do want to make sure that they are able to meet the demands that we have. And so what we'll do is talk through the budget calendar that we'll have next week, and then we'll work with staff to identify whether or not we can move this presentation up. Otherwise, I would encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting having the staff do this presentation in January. It still will allow us enough time to make sure that we're able to still include any recommendations that we see fit as part of the budget. Councilmember Small?
I'd like to call the question on this particular motion. So can we do that so I can do my part?
Sure.
I'm calling the question on this motion to vote for them to come back in January, which is what she said. In my understanding,
Right,
she
and
did
I
not have she did not hear the friendly amendment as well heard. So I'm calling the question on what we have on the floor.
So to the amendment, I would like to simply,
This is
two things. I completely agree, and I would like it to be more specific, because as much as I appreciate what you all have put in front of us today, I am quoting from last October's resolution, which says, direct city staff to develop and present revised traffic calming, sidewalk request, and street safety policies and procedures within 6 months of October. So I don't think it's too much to ask to push this beyond a presentation and say, yes, give us please some specific options for what we can actually adopt. Give us resolution language, give us options for amending the regulations, whatever it is, rather than, again, yes, we need it, but what specifically can we do? And I would like to, whatever we need to toughen yours up a little and make it more specific.
Right.
I would like to
I
do
just
that.
want to make sure that everyone's clear. What I've asked for staff to do is to provide us, as was presented today, staff have been just thinking and identifying potential approaches that may be able to address the recommendations that have been called for in terms of the process. And so what I was proposing is that staff will come back and present to us those proposals.
Okay.
So that, in addition, not just presenting the proposals, but also providing us with what are the resources that are needed to implement them in January. As of right now, those potential options are not fully baked. And so the hope is that they will come back in January with those fully baked options, along with any costs associated with them, so that the council can vote on approving the staff to move forward with those items.
And so that would be costs for implementing them, not costs for, gee, we need a little more money and a little more time to develop them.
No, it's
Just want to make sure that we are clear on that.
Yeah.
So yes, if there's a third on the calling for the motion, I'd love to.
Okay. So I know that there's been a lot of back and forth. I just want to make sure that we're all clear on what's on the table. So what's on the table is to have staff come back to council in January to communicate to us proposed recommendations for addressing traffic calming, specifically around moving towards a data-driven approach that is not petition-based, as well as what are the resources that are needed to do that or to implement that proposal. Also, there's a modification to include the sidewalk process as well, and any recommendations that staff have on what we can do to improve that request process also, and the resources that are needed there.
I just have questions.
Oh my God, call question. Can we just vote?
Councilmember Small, if you could please
I'm
be
sorry.
respectful of others.
My apologies. I called it so long ago.
I mean, I have questions about, like, to me, what data-driven is, because to me, it doesn't have to be data-driven where we're gonna go out and do a traffic study. Some of the things that were recommended by the Complete Safe Streets, such as how close it is to a school, how many accidents are happening there, like, that is data, right? And so, like, it's important to me that we're not focused on, like, collecting more traffic data, because I think that we already have data that we can be moving on, and we don't need new data.
Just, I hear you, Councilmember Fulcher, and agree. Just to clarify, data-driven approach is not limited to specific types of data.
Okay, and I just want to make sure, because some of what I was hearing was, well, we don't have the traffic data, and I don't think we need the traffic data. I think that we have other data that we should be relying on that will be less expensive and that will allow us to move forward on some of the issues that we're having in the city.
Right. No, I hear you, and I definitely defer to staff, but agree that if there are some things that are really clear in terms of the criteria for identifying where speed bumps should be. But when we are talking about trying to address more holistic community-wide traffic calming needs, then having that added data is helpful, but it's not mutually exclusive.
And if there's a reason, I know that we talked about sidewalks versus traffic calming. If there is a reason that we should be using different criteria for the two, I would like to understand staff's explanation for that, because it might be simpler to come up with one set of criteria that works for both processes.
Correct. So again, I do just want to make sure that, that we have this motion on the floor in terms of the process that has just been communicated in terms of what we're asking staff to do in terms of coming back to us in January. There's been a motion, there's been a second. I do want to just make sure that all those in favor of having the staff come back in January with these recommendations, along with communicating what the actual needs are to implement the recommendations that are proposed, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Do we have any opposed? Any abstain? Okay. So staff, just to clarify for everyone, staff will be coming back to council in January. Now, if there are any other comments or questions for staff based on the presentation that we've had today, everyone can please hit your lights. Okay, Councilmember Small, your light.
No, I'm ready. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation today. I think there are, however, a couple of other things that are important to Ward 6 specifically that I don't think the mayor touched on, thankfully, so that I would have some room to do this. It is not my intention to excoriate anybody or anything. But logistically, there's some things about the way in which the process of getting from point A to point B on traffic calming or any other thing occur based on what I've read. That include the opportunity of the council to make people do things. And you guys have asked for some direction. One of the things that's been going on in Ward 6, particularly with the New Hampshire Avenue Community Association, is being sick and tired of being sick and tired of what was always a problem, and that has become a really big problem. One of the things about that that we've been appreciative of is the coordinated effort between the police department and the planning department and public works to address some of those issues with the watchful eye of the city manager's office. To that end, I'd like to say a couple of things. One being that when you have an actual community association that has put in requests or feels that they have put in a variety of requests that weren't heard or timely or whatever, then you end up with people with a chip on their shoulder about it. And I fully understand that. Also, when you have a bunch of people who are policy wonks, then they get to policy wonking on each other in the neighborhood, and then you end up with the same situation. So I fully understand that as well. So I've made some efforts here to make this go a little smoother with regard to what I've been continually saying were the exigent circumstances. And at the end of this, I'm going to make a motion. We have not only the community association, but the community association has sort of a historical amount of data, and the community association has organized a traffic calming committee. I do believe there's been some meetings, or at least some sort of overtures between the city and them, and I appreciate that tremendously. Part of the reason for this is that I'd like to see this just be a routinized, reasonable process of getting to a conclusion on a very specific issue. And so I just wanted to begin with the fact that all of the relevant parties have been really, really effective, or at least transparent in their willingness to try to deal with this. And so my thought is that if we put your expertise into the mix at the same time as we put whatever we're getting from the committee, whether that be melodramatic or not, into the mix, that we'll be able to have a more reasonable decision on how we're going to move forward about this issue. It gets worse at different times of the year. It gets worse after daylight savings time. The cut-throughs and crime are a reality for us because of the ingress and egress and where we are. We also have a couple of different businesses that run driving schools in our area, and so there's different sorts of things that are going on. So I just wanted to tell you guys in advance that it's been really heartening to have the prospect of actually doing some work on this as a thing instead of sort of the churn associated with it. And when I say it, I'm not talking about this issue, but more the way we end up kind of churning ourselves into oblivion instead of doing something. So to that end, I would like to make a motion that the staff provide their full recommendations between planning, public works, and the police department for street closures and any other traffic calming measures that could affect Glenside or Wildwood or Ann Street, because those are the ones that are the big ones that go all the way across. If that includes closing streets that are other streets that are in the area, I know that the general part of it that people have sort of agreed on is that Holton is going to have to stay because that's the one with the light. But everything else is fair game. And so then that way, the committee, with whatever they come up with, then we will have a collaborative democratic process that drives to a conclusion that everybody is happy with. At the same time, it's liberating the staff to be able to make some assertions that may make people uncomfortable. So can I have a second?
Second.
So we'll open for questions. I have a quick question because I want to make sure that I understand, and I apologize, I need a bio break. So are you putting forward a motion to have staff to do an assessment of the traffic patterns in the New Hampshire Gardens community? No.
Because I think that based on the fact that we have had these issues for a significant period of time, and if anything, it's just been sort of maybe a multiplier effect of what some of the real crux of the issues are that are including both the cut-through traffic, the changes from SHA and crime, which is what happens when you are in an economically stressful economy, that I am certain that our staff has ideas about what they would do if they could just do. And so I would like for them to give those to us in a timely manner, like maybe 3 weeks, something like that.
Point of
Director.
point of order. May I comment as the second why I seconded? It is my observation that we actually have a wealth of data at this moment that we have never had at our fingertips before. And so I would love to hear from the staff. I mean, the reason I seconded is because it feels to me like we do have this data, and now is the moment to start to use it, even if we don't have the criteria. And I am hopeful that perhaps by going into a neighborhood where these problems are already widely recognized, and perhaps where it is more difficult to do the petition process and get those outcomes realized quickly, that this does free the staff to take a bit of a risk where Director Braithwaite, you have said, you've experienced over many years of doing this, that you can be critiqued, but that this would free you up to use that data wisely in a neighborhood where I don't think there will be nearly as many complaints. There'll be a lot of clapping and saying, thank you for trying this. Let's see how it goes. And I would like to see if it goes well, if we can try it in another part of the neighborhood, such as Ward 5, where that might also be very, very useful.
Thank you, Cara. And I just would like to say, since it's my motion, that I am in no way trying to impugn the professionalism of anybody who is in this room, whether that be or not in the room, in case Chief's watching. I actually think you guys totally know what you would potentially do in a collaborative circumstance. And for whatever reason, it is historically anathema for that to be provided. And so I am hoping to bind you like a spell on the council days to doing such a thing, so that you actually get to do your jobs well, and that people don't come up and imply things about how you do your jobs, which is what seems to happen a lot around here. And that's why I emphasize the democratic process rather than the rabble and the rousing.
Okay. So, Director Braithwaite, do you have an answer? And I do have a follow-up question.
I have a lot that generated a lot of thoughts. One is, previously we were talking about reevaluating our process. That's not specific to a street, a neighborhood. It is basically trying to figure out what's the best way to update and regenerate our traffic calming and sidewalk process. It is critical to look at that without a specific street in mind, because you're not designing to a specific street or neighborhood. We want to have a citywide approach that uses all these criteria that have been spelled out in the resolution: equitable, data-driven, vulnerable population. That's what we want our policy to exist. We have one that we've started with. What we were hoping is to hear more specifics about what you'd like to see changed. We have a bunch of ideas, but we want to know what the political reality is for you all in terms of what is most problematic or what is most missing from our process. So that was the road we were on. Now with the new, this most recent motion, it seems to be asking us to design a specific traffic calming approach for this particular neighborhood. And I would say, right out of the box, we would need to hire a traffic engineer to look at the full approach. If we're going to look at and Mayor Searcy, you probably recall when we last had a traffic engineer doing a neighborhood-wide approach in New Hampshire Gardens. We had innumerable meetings. We had data analysis for speeds and volume and cut-through. It was a major, major multi-month effort.
Well, and I don't mean to cut you off, Director, and I'm not trying to be rude here, but I think my point is that actually happened. And if anything, and if at time T, you have X data, and then at time T plus 1, you have what is on the ground or identifiably a potentially worse situation, then at a minimum, you can at least rely on the previous amounts of data that you have to begin a process. I'd like to push back a little bit with regard to the characterization of my motion, because these are things that have been on the minds of the people in my neighborhood for a long time. These are things that have been on the minds of the previous mayor when she was in my position. And there are things that have occurred in the attempt to get traffic calming in Ward 6, whether it be individual speed bumps or other things that have kind of devolved into this need for data that it seems that we already have. And so,
Well, and
again,
I guess
I'm
we
just
need to be clear about what data we have. Our police
correct.
department did some traffic counts. We have 4 blocks worth of traffic counts. In my mind, that is not sufficient data for the kind of wholesale change we're talking about.
Correct.
What I am saying is this: if we have a planning department and we have a public works staff and we have an institutional memory of the number of different times that we put the blocking strips down on Wildwood, we could chart that over. Like, there's any number of ways to do it. But what I am talking about specifically is there is a desire among the residents to close streets. There is a desire among the residents for additional traffic calming. And there is a desire among the residents to do this with some alacrity, whether it be taking advantage of the current processes that we have and overloading them with speed bumps or whatever else so that we can make our street look more like Ward 3 over by the VFW or some other place. That I believe that this staff, having discussed these issues with each other before, could provide some recommendations. And if I have to make the motion more specific as to which streets you would close, whether or not we can continue or completely close, and when there will be some sort of acknowledgement of the deaths on University and New Hampshire, or when someone is going to talk about motorcycles and all the other sorts of things, I could do that. But I am limiting this to the fact that for years, people keep saying the same thing. And in order for those people to make a reasonable decision, they should know what the opinions of the staff are.
So I want to interject because, as former Ward 6 council member, I can tell you all of the joys and the pains that we've gone through in terms of not just looking at New Hampshire Gardens, but also Hillwood Manor community, which actually Erskine is one of
we can get to
most,
Erskine next.
Yeah, it's the most popular, it's the most traveled street in the city. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, one of the major issues for us in that neighborhood was the impact of Purple Line construction. Those neighborhoods are the main neighborhoods that are negatively impacted by construction. So then you're left with a question. Do I build around what is the traffic pattern as a result of construction? Or do I try to see what happens once construction is complete and then we build the traffic calming necessary and cut off whatever we need to cut off once we have a firm understanding of the actual real impacts of the Purple Line on traffic flow in the neighborhood, keeping in mind that we're not just rolling in the dough where we can do massive street neighborhood reconfigurations every 2 to 3 years. Now, keeping in mind, I will be the first to admit, we thought the Purple Line was going to be done a long time ago. And we have been living with the construction for far longer than anyone here would have ever liked to have to experience. But the reality is, you have this issue of having to negotiate ongoing construction and whether or not you permanently modify traffic flow around the temporary traffic patterns in the neighborhood. Additionally, we have had conversations with the residents in the neighborhood around potential modifications. And this goes back to the first conversation, and this is something that we all need to consider when we're talking about the petition process. The petition process is just one mechanism of community engagement. It shouldn't be the only mechanism, but it is one. And what happens a lot when we make these proposals, if we don't have that resident buy-in, it doesn't move forward. So my question for Councilmember Small is, one, are we asking for staff to propose permanent modifications to New Hampshire Gardens based on temporary traffic patterns that are associated with the Purple Line? And if so, how is that something that needs to happen right now versus seeing how the recommendations in terms of how we are permanently modifying and what the staff may need in terms of actual data? Because I would argue that just knowing traffic counts along Wildwood is not telling you who's coming into which entrances, how far they're traveling down certain streets before they turn, which helps you to understand what you need to cut off and what you need to dead end.
Well, my response to that, Mayor, would be that the fact that these issues are primarily derived from a south to north derivation along New Hampshire Avenue, which currently doesn't have a significant amount of construction on it at that place. And that most of those people that are going through on the 3 lanes that aren't turn lanes have no concern about what's really going on New Hampshire Ave or on the other cut-through areas. That we have had a fairly consistent understanding of the south to north issues related to both commuter traffic and cut-through traffic. At night, due to the fact that we are adjacent to New Hampshire Avenue, we have any number of things that can happen when cars are moving around quickly. I know that the police department is well aware of that, because whenever you start to ask them about crime and things like that, that's the first thing that they say. And so, what I am proposing here is that if we have a community association that is interested in substantive changes to their neighborhood, and that community association has generated a committee in which they're going to make recommendations, and that I am trying to leave out the fact that on the statutes that we have on the paper, that is supposed to be an independently significant way to end up with traffic calming, and somehow it didn't end up with traffic calming. I'd like to leave that alone as a premise because, again, I feel like you got sort of screwed over. So my assertion is, if the staff makes a recommendation and then the people make a recommendation, then those 2 groups of people can then discuss those recommendations to come up with the best thing for the neighborhood, particularly since those things I would presuppose would be based on best practices. That is my opinion.
So I do just want to, and I don't want to, there are a lot of other lights that are on right now. There's a motion on the table. I will put this caveat out there that, and definitely Director Braithwaite, correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing that we're talking about today that would preclude a resident group because what we're talking about, is traffic calming, but it includes things like street closures, which dovetails in a weird way with sidewalk kind of modifications as well. There's nothing that we're talking about right now that would preclude a neighborhood association from developing a traffic committee, coming up with recommendations that they have around potential traffic patterns, meeting with you all to discuss, what's feasible and to kind of get your thoughts on that. And those items that are feasible and practical and doable, I should say, Councilmember Small working with those residents to, especially as we enter into the budget process, to propose that as a project for inclusion in the budget. I just want to make sure, Director Braithwaite, that I'm not.
That'll work too. I feel like that's a component part of what I'm talking about.
Well, we have had a New Hampshire Gardens meeting that city manager put together, fairly well attended. We gave a lot of general information just to try to even the playing field so people knew what the existing policy was. We've had a follow-up with the leadership of the New Hampshire Gardens Neighborhood Association just to talk through some things. And that was a Zoom meeting. In that meeting alone, there was a lot of conflicting opinions as to what they wanted to do, and they let us know there's going to be a subcommittee of the Neighborhood Association
Which
to
has been
discuss traffic
established.
calming. Yeah.
And so my
last,
assertion
we
is
said
only.
is we offer, you want us to meet, we're happy to meet, police, public works, planning.
Yeah, no,
just
Daryl,
let us know, we can
again,
get into those conversations.
Since it's my motion, all I am really trying to say here is that in order to move this football, if you staff people as people who know the landscape and the area, make your opinions known, then I would argue that there may be some deference from recalcitrant people who just have wild frustrations about either street.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to sort of, like, my goal here is to move this ball at the same time as not have people saying outlandish or unreasonable things to any of you about this, because this needs to go from point A to point B and conclusion.
Yeah, my main concern is we have a process in place now that's regulatory and resolution. It's very clear, and we've been operating under this process for better or worse. And the council's talking about changing the process. So if in the meantime we're gonna do our own little unique thing outside of the existing process or the potential future process, we're really in a brave new world of how we're going to make decisions.
I understand I understand that, but I think the argument that I'm making to you is that if we know that we have a pre-existing process that has a couple of different entry points, one of them being the neighborhood associations, rather than having those people spin their wheels by throwing wild assertions back and forth at each other. Like some people are going to only want Glenside closed or Wildwood closed right in their block. Like, we've seen it on the list there a million times. Like, I'm not trying to get bogged down in that. I am hoping that an actual professional staff can make some assertions based on maybe the overwhelming volume of complaints over time, based on a number of things.
But Councilmember Small, that aligns with what we have just said that we want the staff to come back to us with in terms of the criteria.
Yes, but that doesn't do anything for the immediate ameliorative conditions on Glenside and Wildwood, which is how this began.
But to fix that would require incorporating those modifications in the budget, right? So what I'm saying is that, in my opinion, this motion can teeter this line of circumventing, aspects of, one, trying to cram something through in the process we have right now that we know we want to change, but two, the assumption could then be that there is some council pre-approval of what comes out of this, right? So in my mind, it would make...
I don't think that that's the case. I would argue that if we had staffers that have been dealing with an issue for a long time and they have been liberated to give their professional opinion about an issue, then and that it's a deliberative process, an entry into a deliberative process, then no one would be presupposing that we are saying that this is what they should do, because all we are really doing is allowing for people who have organized themselves under a reasonable codified structure in Tacoma Park to be involved in the decision making. Based on the way I understand the way things are currently written, we can do that as a council person. And so I am doing that now. And if people don't want to vote for it, then that's fine. But it won't be said that I didn't make an attempt to try to ameliorate this issue so that the people in the neighborhood don't go and feel like there is nothing but apathy on the part of the staff, and that the people on the staff don't think that we just have a bunch of wonky blowhards. It would be ameliorative and effective.
Point of order. May I make a friendly amendment, a suggested amendment? I am hearing what I think is a relevant issue in my ward as well as yours because of the purple line in particular and cut-throughs and pass-throughs. I'm wondering if it might be helpful if we were to add to the resolution that we just passed as part of this one to say, could the staff make specific recommendations in the January meeting related to purple line construction related pass-through situations and how we might ameliorate those in the short run, at least, before any major traffic studies are done, and in light of the equitable criteria that are being proposed in January. What does my fellow council member think about that? I know that wasn't well worded, but I'm just trying to get to the heart of what you are thinking about, and it may not be speaking to that.
I think I hear what you're saying, Cara, but I don't necessarily think it is timely to my original motion because of the fact that the purple line issues and the I don't know, the apathy of the purple line or whoever else is involved here are institutional norms in that area for at least the last 5 or 6 years anyway. So it's not necessarily as relevant to have, that's a whole separate issue of ire that I think that we have to deal with, because the fact of the matter is University Avenue, I firmly believe that the purple line has decided that because there's so many Hispanic people over there that they'll just, we'll let it be like a third world country on the weekends, and it's appalling. But having said that, I do think that this is just a way to acknowledge the neighborhood associations and their relative impact at the same time as allowing for the staff to give an opinion that does not have the imprimatur of authority, so that the conversation can actually occur with some pace. That is all that I had intended.
Can I just say that when you're looking at where to place a speed bump, you don't need to be a traffic engineer. There's a lot of just common sense stuff, general engineering principles. Where's the stop signs? Where's the driveways? How is the traffic flow? When you're talking about making streets restrictive, it's an entire different universe of traffic. I would not feel comfortable making staff recommendations without a traffic engineer. I can't stress that we do not have a traffic engineer on staff. There is no one on city staff that is trained in traffic engineering. We all learn quick and pick things up and talk very well with those folks that have gone to school and done this work for decades, but there's a lot more to it. I would be very uncomfortable making a staff recommendation for how to close various roads or restrict access, turn streets one way in a neighborhood without having a full analysis done by traffic engineering
I'm frustrated by this, because here's the issue. The conundrum here, therefore, would be that if people are alleging that we have green lights from SHA to close whatever streets we decide are necessary to be closed. We just have to say something. And we have people in the neighborhood who have been desperately asking, at least for a couple of streets, have been closed for a long time. And now we have some appetite to do it. That at the end of this process, I find it hard to believe that no one has either an opinion or a relationship that can't come down with a professional response to a need that is going on anyway. It's like saying, like what you're basically saying now is that we want everybody to go and get together and tell us what to do, and this is what what you're gonna say. And then, well, now we need to get a traffic study to make sure what you said is whatever. Like at some point, these have to be democratically held processes in which people who are being elected, who are telling people or being told what to do, can tell the staff what people want them to do. And so I would like if you're not going to vote, you vote up and down. It doesn't matter to me now. But the fact of the matter is, I thought this would be a good opportunity based on what we have on paper already to do the thing that is actually on paper, which is to be the council person that required this. So please vote or don't vote.
Okay, so we're gonna move forward. I will say, and I do want to say, prior to the vote on this, which I think is what is before us, is to allow for neighborhood association to work with city staff to come up with recommendations regarding street closures and traffic improved traffic patterns for New Hampshire Gardens Community Association, or the New Hampshire Gardens neighborhood. As I will say for folks, I was the former president of the New Hampshire Gardens Community Association years ago, and this was something that plagued us as well, because Purple Line's been going on a long time, in case you didn't know. And one of the things that I know that a number of residents have really asked for has been traffic calming. And I do support that wholeheartedly. I just don't think that this is the way to do it. I think that we are undermining what we're striving to do in terms of creating a equitable approach, a systematic approach, and transforming the way in which we are identifying this work. By trying to undercut right now. I do think, however, that it is important because, again, as I mentioned previously, we've received so many requests to have traffic studies. And so my hope is, of course, that in January, we will get some feedback from staff around those resource needs, and we can actually try to figure out how to budget for the traffic studies that we need in different segments of our community so that we can plan accordingly for them. I know that there's a lot of lights that are on. I do want to acknowledge those members of council that maybe have questions regarding this motion.
I would like to
before
call
we
the
vote.
question. Seeing as how this only has to do with Ward 6, I would like to call the question on my own motion so that we can move on to a more hospitable conversation with everyone else.
I think the risk with that is that people who have not had a chance to
all
talk
right.
are going to vote no.
They may vote no. I don't even care.
All right, are there any other questions regarding the motion that's on the floor?
Yes, I would appreciate two things. One is first of all, I think I understand the problem, and I think I understand how it has been neglected to be resolved over a long period of time, and I get that that makes it important to do, as to address and to address soon. But I'm still not completely clear what the resolution is, so I would appreciate it restated, because as I am understanding it, I'm not sure I see what the difference is between what you want to do and what is standard procedure already.
I would say that the critical aspect of this is the standard procedure already part, because there seems to be an inherent deference to the petitioning process as opposed to the actual, concerns as articulated by either council members or neighborhood associations. So in order to ensure that the neighborhood association and their democratically elected processes will be fully involved to a resolution that is expedited, given the, let's say, 11 years that this has really been an issue, that we do that, because technically that's what it says we can do on the paper now. Yes, Cindy, I agree with you. It says that on the paper.
But
So
that's
the
another, I'm so sorry, but that is another dividing factor. There are so many neighborhoods, communities in this city that don't have functioning neighborhood associations.
I'm not sure if that is the fault of the New Hampshire Gardens Neighborhood Association. And in an effort to enhance the democratic aspects of this particular association, who has been given the opportunity to provide recommendations to council people before, and those recommendations didn't seem to make it into the matrix, that it would seem good to just go ahead and do that now with people who are not, like, I'm not trying to scare anybody into doing anything, and I'm not, like, it takes 4 cinder blocks to put across a road in order to make sure that nobody can drive on it. Like, what's the cost of those big cinder blocks? Maybe. But generally speaking, I find it hard to believe that we cannot derive a professional opinion about anything in this town. I don't understand why we keep ending up here. We didn't have professional opinions on the other stuff, and then we ended up with people just running around talking crazy.
All right, thank
for
you so
months.
much, Councilmember Small, because I
Call the
really want to.
question.
Can you
Let's go-
restate the motion?
Can you restate your motion, Councilmember
Or
Small?
do you, or I went, I'm
I would move to have the collaborative efforts of the staff that have been included in this meeting, being the police department, the planning department, and the public works department, to provide a set of coordinated opinions or recommendations or something about additional traffic calming measures. And I am asking this based on the sheer volume of vituperations that have to be in the system already. Thank you.
All right, so Councilmember Small has made a motion. Councilmember Honzak has seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so I have 3 ayes for, I'm sorry, all those in favor, okay, all those opposed, nay. So we've,
I'd like my vote to be aye.
okay, Councilmember, okay, well, let's do this all over. All those in favor of the motion put forth by Councilmember Smalls, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay.
abstain. I'm
Okay,
still
any
not
abstain? Okay, so it sounds like we have 4 ayes, 1 nay, and 2 abstain.
Sounds like a motion that carries.
All right. Okay, do you have any other questions for staff? Looks like
Yes.
Councilmember DeBala.
Thank you. You were looking for, I have a number of questions about the presentation. Thank you. It was really great. You were also looking for suggestions from council about what we would and wouldn't recommend, and I have some thoughts there. So my first question, and let me just get it all out, and then we can go back to individuals, individual points, is either tonight or at some point hearing more detail about the analysis that you all did of the speed limit, the speed limit possibilities, and your conclusion that, with the possible exception of school zones, that it's really state highways that we need to think about reducing the speed limits. And so that's great, and that makes intuitive sense. But I would appreciate to hear a little more about how you got there, either tonight or some point, perhaps in an email to the council. What's the best way to do this? Because I don't want to derail the rest of the conversation.
I think we also have Chief Duvall on the call who joined specifically to be able to answer questions about that, if that
Okay.
is useful. or whatever is easy.
Chief, did you catch that question? If not,
I did. I think that the specific question was about the 15-mile-per-hour speed limit.
Yes.
And
And thank you
yeah.
all for taking that on and thinking it through. I really appreciate it. Yes.
We analyzed, reducing the speed limit on our residential streets. And I think as the presentation represented, we just do not think, other than in school zones, that it was necessarily going to impact or increase pedestrian safety or traffic safety. We do absolutely think that roadways, state roadways throughout the city could be reduced. The reason is, we already have, in most of the speed surveys we do, speed is not necessarily the issue. A lot of it is volume. So we don't necessarily have speed problems now. Also, from an enforcement standpoint, most of our residential streets, it would be almost impossible to do any type of enforcement on. Overall, it does not seem like, it seems like it's a great tool on a one-off basis. So if you have a particular area in the city that it may work, that would be great. But we have not identified any city streets within the city where we think that reducing the speed limit from 25 to 20 and or 15 would increase traffic and or pedestrian safety.
Okay, and is it fair to say that you looked at the entire city?
When you talk about the entire city, we look at the topography of the vast majority of our city streets. And problem areas within the city have already been analyzed for what we can do improvement-wise. So to say that we analyzed every particular city street, no, we've not done that. But we've not found an area that is a problem area that has been evaluated where we feel like reducing the speed limit from 25 to 20 or 15 would be effective. And that does not say that when we now get a complaint, say, for example, use Wildwood or other adjoining streets in Ward 6, that we cannot use that particular evaluation in our toolbox of what to evaluate. But we have not found any particular area where we feel like this reducing the speed limit would improve traffic or indoor pedestrian safety.
Okay, so this is very helpful. So this doesn't close off the possibility that when we're looking at a problem area, this might still be a tool there. But as an overall, as a survey, if you will, nothing jumped out. Well, not nothing, the school zones. And so I just wanted to get a little more clarity for me and for the public on how you got to this conclusion.
And the school
So
zones
this
are
is great.
different criteria
Yeah, okay.
for evaluation. But yeah, we do have reduced speeds in our school zones, and I think that's important in certain school zones. But yeah, I think, like I say, it's a really good tool to have in our toolbox. But as of right now, we haven't identified any particular roadways that we think that it would be effective.
Okay, thank you. Going back to the presentation overall, when I was thinking about this, I looked at both the traffic calming and the sidewalk processes, and I looked at the technical, and for example, the technical on the speed bumps is in the code even, which might be going a little far, because what if it needs to change? And on the sidewalk side, there doesn't seem to be a lot of written policy on the technical. So I was looking at technical, which is, I think, your business, the staff business, to tell us what is the best way to do that. I was looking at criteria, because the data-driven, what are the factors that one looks at to say whether a proposed traffic calming, anything makes sense. We don't seem to have that articulated. So that would be, in January, something I would really like to see a focus on is what is that? What are the criteria for the traffic calming, for the speed? And maybe that's in the public space management process that you're going to talk about, and maybe it's not. And then the third thing that we have is two different processes. So again, technical criteria and process. So from where I sit, having two different processes creates confusion, at least in Ward 2 among residents. Which process, why does it go this way, not that way? Are there other ways to do it? We just talked about whether there was another way to call for traffic calming besides a petition. And the only way we could do it apparently was for a council member to bring it up and make a motion out of it. So we need to clarify that and make it similar to the sidewalks. And so those three areas is kind of how I was thinking about it, if that's helpful as you approach January. Were you going to say something? Oh, okay. And I had one other question. Give me a moment. Two other questions. On traffic calming, there's a general list in the regulation that that names a bunch of choices, and again, now there are some perhaps more choices as technology changes. You talked about the flashing beacons for one particular intersection, things like that have come out recently. How could we make sure that as we make these changes that this new process, new set of policies keeps up with that set of changes? My last two questions have to do with the county's Vision Zero process, how this is again something I would like to hear about, how we piggyback on that or take part in it to get as much out of that as we can as a city. And last but not least, ways to deal with SHA, if that's where a lot of the safety focus needs to be. Tackling that straight on would be very helpful. And I'm reminded that I've had continuing emails with someone from SHA about whether they would fund and under what circumstances they would fund sidewalk work. So we need to follow up on that. That's just popped into my head as we were talking. I like the best practices that you talked about, building that in, and I agree that we need some feedback from you on what it would take to do the more holistic approach in terms of staff resources, in terms of time, in terms of money. But I wouldn't want to wait on making some changes to the processes that we have now before we do all that. So does that help in terms of where I'm coming from? Yes? Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Fulcher?
Just making sure that I understand, when we're doing sidewalk and traffic calming measures, who's actually doing that work? Is it Public Works employees or is it contractors that are doing that work?
The design and planning or the construction?
The construction.
Construction's done all by contractors. We don't have any concrete crews within the city.
Okay, and then right now, how does the queue work? Like, I'm assuming that that in the future, when we have a more equitable process, that projects that had more weight to them would be moved to the top of the queue. Is there anything like that right now, or?
No, currently it's kind of first come, first serve, and then the budget process, we lay out for council how many current requests we have, which ones are in what state, or have they been started, are they designed, are they ready to construct? So every year we sort of have a point in time where we say, here's what we've got, and then the council makes funding decisions. So it's open for people to request those anytime throughout the year. We don't have a date by which or a month by which you have to request it. So they just come in as a first come, first served basis. The sidewalk process, as we've said, is much more involved in that there's an initial meeting and then a design vote, and then we hire a consultant to design, have multiple meetings to review it, then we have a construction vote. And then it gets built as funding is available. With traffic calming, it's the petition process. It can be a community meeting, but oftentimes it's not because the community has already met and discussed it. And so I think the change will be for those more holistic approaches at traffic calming that aren't speed hump driven. It's been historically very challenging to do things beyond speed humps because when you start looking at other traffic calming measures, you usually have to eliminate parking and you're having greater impacts to residents. So it's very challenging to move that forward.
I am very uncomfortable with us continuing to do the sidewalk work and the traffic calming measures, and so I would like to make a motion to do a moratorium on any more sidewalks or traffic calming measures until we're able to get the recommendations from staff and implement them on a more equitable process.
Second.
We currently have a neighborhood meeting set up for October 19th on the Darwin Avenue sidewalk request. Am I to tell them that they can't proceed?
No.
And I guess
sorry,
I would
I
like to
didn't
hear
hear
more
which
about
street.
what.
Exactly. You know, I understand that precedence has been set where members of council are just making motions from the dais. And the concern with that is that there has not been an opportunity for staff to provide us with the necessary information to understand the true impacts of what it is that we're moving. We have items that are currently in our budget regarding sidewalk projects that need to be installed. If we place moratoriums on items that are in queue, depending on where they are, it could have budgetary impacts for us in terms of our ability to execute what we have already informed staff that they are able to do. I would like for us to make sure that when we're making these types of motions, just out of professional courtesy, because this has happened a lot tonight, that if we want certain things to be discussed and for council to vote on them, that we do everyone the due diligence of at least giving folks a heads up before this meeting so that staff can be prepared to answer the necessary questions and we can have a full discussion regarding what is proposed during the meeting. It's not fair to staff, it's not fair to our colleagues when we are consistently just putting motions out there that have not been pre-discussed. And it's not to, you know, again, it's not you, Councilmember Fulcher, but this has happened a number of times tonight. And there are some that have been, you know, so I want to make sure that when we're voting, because I could tell with the last vote, there were some, not everyone was clear on what they were voting on. And I don't want folks to be in a position where we're having to vote on things that they don't feel like they have the necessary understanding of the issues and are prepared to vote. So the question I have right now is, if there is a moratorium on sidewalks and traffic calming projects, Director Braithwaite, what would be the impact of that? Because that would actually impact what we just voted on.
Did you mean new?
Yeah.
New sidewalks.
That would impact exactly what we just voted on. So what would be the impact?
Currently we have received a request for Darwin Avenue to start the sidewalk design process. It's an area where both planning and public works and police have been very interested in getting involved in a broader approach, as we've said, because of the middle school and traffic safety issues and intersection concerns. So that process is in the very early stages. They actually submitted a petition. They didn't need to submit a petition, but they did. We have a Belford Place sidewalk that has been designed, fully vetted and approved that we're waiting for construction. We currently don't have sufficient funds in the budget to construct that, so it's waiting to be built. In terms of traffic calming, we have had outreach from a couple of streets. I'm blanking on which one. The 7500 block of Jackson Avenue is one, and a couple others, but they haven't moved forward in the petition process. So it's just been back and forth communication with some of the members of the community.
So I just want to confirm with Councilmember Fulcher, are you suggesting a moratorium on any traffic calming or sidewalk project that has not fully complied with the current process for submission, meaning submitting a petition and where they have the necessary number of folks, or have been submitted, as Councilmember Small has proposed, should the New Hampshire Gardens Neighborhood Association, in consultation with staff, identify through this mechanism sidewalks or traffic calming that they would like to propose. Where would we like this moratorium to begin?
Willing to withdraw the motion. I would like to see where all of the projects are before we keep on going, because, you know, this was, you know, just like Councilmember Dybala said, like, basically, we have already passed this motion, like, in October of 2022, that we were supposed to be getting, you know, exactly what we're asking for in January, and we haven't gotten there. And so at what point do we stop going forward over and over again with projects? I mean, I do think that that many of the projects that we're talking about, you know, specifically Darwin Avenue, and my understanding from what we were talking about tonight is that that we're looking at a bigger process with Darwin Avenue than what we currently have. And I think that it's likely that what we were talking about, the motion that Councilmember Small made, that is the exact kind of project that is going to pass through the requirements that are going to be made for the new process. But we need a process in place.
Right. And so I think that for me, and again, that's why I voted against the last motion. For me, the critical thing that I need staff to focus on right now is the process. So I need them to focus on, given all of the other things that they've talked about ad nauseum, all of the other things that are on their plate, I need for them to be able to come to us in January with a proposal for the process and communicate to us what the resources they need in order to fully implement this. And then it will enable us to be able to make informed decisions. The way you put a moratorium on sidewalks is you don't fund them, right?
How do they have time to, you know, be coming up with these things, these criteria, if they're still busy working on new plans for sidewalks?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, I think that's a very good question. So, question for staff. If we were to move forward and say, no new sidewalk or traffic calming requests, do you think that would greatly impact your ability to actually develop the policies or proposed policies in January?
I can't speak for the police or planning, given that, you know, it will take some time to do the work that's currently laid out and that just got added this evening significantly for the Ward 6 traffic calming. So, you know, there are only a certain number of people on staff. So you're looking at who does traffic calming.
Yeah.
Mayor,
So,
are we still?
no, we're still focused down this way. So it sounds like, and I just want to make sure that I have clarity, that even if we were to say no additional sidewalk or traffic calming projects, you know, through the end of the year, the current items that are on the list would still require working. So the impact would be nominal, because we're talking about how many months, like 3 months and.
Yep.
Okay. Councilmember Fulcher.
I mean, my concern is that more projects are going to be added. right? So like, we're gonna finish these projects, and then there's gonna be more projects, and then when are we gonna find staff time in order to figure out what these criteria are?
Well, and I might be dipping my toe into unfriendly waters, but I think part of the challenge here has been, we've been, on a staff level, certainly, and I'm speaking only for myself, I've been waiting for council to be specific about changes that they wanted to see. So I think we were in a bit of a chicken and egg, where council was expecting us to come back with specifics. We were expecting council to provide specifics. So I think that's been a little bit of the reason why we haven't made more progress on the policies. We've made a ton of progress on the projects and the work and the grants and the, things that are actually occurring, and the impacts and the improvements in safety. Incredible amounts of work. So I think that's a bit of, we were expecting council to provide the policy directive, because a lot of that, do you want to petition or not, doesn't have anything to do with the technical aspects. It really has to do with the policy-related aspects. How involved does the council want to be in the process? Do we want votes? Do we not? So a lot of that is really council policy-driven, and we've had a changed council from the prior council, where we had a lot more of these types of conversations. So we just haven't heard from the council what would be your ideal process, what you would like to see. So I think that's been a little bit of why we haven't made more progress in the intervening time.
Great. And so one of the other things is that we are now, because of the public space management plan, there are additional aspects of rethinking the process in a different way. So my question is, and I hear you, Director Braithwaite, because like, for example, as I had mentioned before, when I'm thinking about equity, and I think of things like allowing, for example, communities that have neighborhood associations, I think that still caters the process to single-family homeowners. That doesn't allow people in multifamily homes, or it doesn't allow for those communities that have not been mobilized, that are not organized enough to have a neighborhood association.
All the places in Ward 6 have a neighborhood association. I'd argue the towers have a functional neighborhood association, and the Overlook does as well.
I was speaking. But there are other segments of our community, like Ward 5, that don't have a lot of neighborhood associations. They don't have them. So, trying to think through what are the ways in which we can, as a council, call out or provide feedback to staff, so that you all could hear some of the concerns that we all have. I think one way that could happen is for members of council to share any thoughts that they have regarding the process with our city staff and Deputy City Manager Bodek. We can talk about the process in which folks can send their concerns forward. That might make it a little easier for staff to kind of have a more comprehensive view of what some of the concerns or the things that are modifications that members of council would like to make. Would that be something that would be helpful for staff to at least understand, besides the fact that we're just talking about, hey, we don't like the petition, but we have to recognize that a lot of this involves a lot of aspects of community engagement as well.
Just to support what you've just said, Mayor Searcy, I think that we're 2 weeks out from talking about something that would provide the framework for a policy and guidance from council, and that would be the public space management plan. We see council's role as setting those guidelines and policies, and staff's role as impacting that. And so the advantage and the reason for so long we've said yes, but we have a public space management plan coming, is because we feel so strongly that it matters to be able to look at it comprehensively, to be able to put it in a context, a framework that says, these are the vision, these are the goals, these are the steps to get there. This is the high-level piece that council is so well suited to do because you have a perspective from your wards and citywide. And then staff can take that direction and go and do it. So it doesn't put council in the role of trying to make sure every I gets dotted before staff takes a step, but it gives us the mutual understanding and agreement that we are working in the same direction and we know how to get there. And so for us, a lot of it is having that framework, having that big picture that we as staff hopefully give council information and data and perspectives and best practices. Council makes the decisions on how to move forward on that. So there's a mutuality in this, and then staff goes and does it.
Great.
And hopefully that takes some of the detailed burden off of council, and it gives staff the direction we need.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful. I think, so in order to make sure that we're able to move this conversation along, recognize that members of council have some strong thoughts around how we may want to, or recommendations themselves on how we may want to modify this process. I'm going to ask, I know we have a couple of weeks before we have to finalize the public space management plan, which could help inform any suggestions or recommendations that you all have regarding sidewalks and traffic calming. If folks could please send any recommendations or edits that you have within the next 2 weeks to our acting deputy city manager in terms of the concern, comments or recommendations that you have regarding sidewalks and traffic calming. And also just copy, Alex will make sure that you get copied as well, and our HCD folks, just so that we can compile all of the recommendations that staff have. So you all will have them so that when we're preparing for the January meeting, the proposals will be made from a place of understanding some of the concerns that council has raised. And then I do want to go back because I know that Councilmember Fulcher had raised a motion on the floor.
I withdraw it, it's fine.
Okay. And so Councilmember Honzak's light is next.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of this presentation. I've been waiting anxiously for this. I recall attending the October session last 2022 as I was running for office and feeling super excited about all the work that you guys were doing. I think what you're hearing tonight is probably the frustration of the fact that everybody wanted to expedite this. I'm sitting here looking at an email that I got within 2 weeks of winning this office, and I won't say who sent it, but somebody said, 2 people said, okay, so here's how you can get this legislation moving forward on speed limits. So my first question is around speed limits. I don't have the breadth of knowledge that you would have about what's happening around the city, and this may be Chief Duvall. This constituency group, actually 2 of whom were on the Safe Streets Committee. So they spent a lot of time. I read through their report. You know, there was the tool design study from 2009, which might be considered outdated at this point, but I'll get back to that in a second. On the speed limits, am I correct that 20 miles per hour on DC streets is the norm as you come into our city sort of all the way around? Do you know that the answer to that? That is what I was led to believe. Maybe even Chief Duvall could comment.
I'm not intimately familiar with all the speeds in the District of Columbia. I do not believe that all of the adjoining streets are 20 miles per hour, but that's definitely something we could get you an answer for. But I do not believe that that's accurate. But like I say, I'm not intimately familiar with the speeds in the District of Columbia.
Okay. And that was just one of my initial questions. We can continue that dialogue offline. It was an interesting proposition. I wasn't ready to move forward with that kind of thing at the time, in spite of the House legislation. I thought it was interesting, though, just considering our broader context, and I'm bringing it up in public, so we're kind of getting this out in the open. You know, why not go with something that aligns us with the region around us, if that makes sense. But I hear you about enforcement would be really difficult, and you actually want to have impact and not have a bunch of people breaking the law. That's not getting to us where we want to be. So, and then my second bucket is about sidewalks and traffic calming. So I hear you, Director Braithwaite, saying, please be more specific, council, on what you want. I think what I want to see, and I think my sentiment is probably shared, is taking, there are these three buckets, and I'm not looking at the slide right now, but if you look at the slide deck that you presented, you can see the traffic calming that exists in the city. It's very clear where that's happening, and the disparities are extremely clear. You can also see where we have accident data, and very quickly you can turn on the markers to see where we've had fatal accidents, where we've had collisions that have led to fatalities, and you can see really clear patterns around all of that. And then I think the other one is called, what is it, the predictive safety analysis that you said you found particularly useful.
Yeah.
You're probably much more knowledgeable too about how to even look at that information, I think, probably than we are, because you've been doing this for so long and you're a planner. So I can fully appreciate, Director Braithwaite, where you're coming from when you say that a traffic safety expert can help round all of that out. At the same time, I think what the council is probably asking for here is, and what I'm asking for is as you look towards January and you give us these recommendations, that you are taking those three sets of data in particular, and because we didn't have these before, and looking at them within the city of Tacoma, and just doing the lowest hanging fruit from the get-go. First of all, what are the steps that are already within our power to reduce those fatalities and collisions, period. Right now, business as usual is leading us to those data that we see there. And business as usual is extremely inequitable and not democratic. It is a process that is clear. But, and I'm going to draw a parallel, I hope it's not too radical, but if we look at what just happened in the last, I guess it's the 15 years that I've lived in Tacoma Park, the school district made a radical decision, and they've continued to make them. They are, they first, when my now 17-year-old turned 6, or actually it was a little bit beyond that. The first big decision is they decided there were no more applications anymore for, you couldn't have teacher recommendations that were given to each student that the parents asked for. You couldn't, they were going to use numbers, and it was equity-based. And I guarantee you that a lot of parents were quaking in their shoes, especially the privileged parents. I probably am one of them. I'll say it out loud. I am one of them. I was like, crap, I don't have any control anymore. And that's what we want to do. We want to break up that systemic inequity. And we can do that by being bold. It's going to be painful. We're going to get kickback. We, the council, are ready to take the kickback. Tell us what policies you need us to pass, and tell us now, so that we can have your backs and we can help you do what we're asking you to do. If we're not doing it fast enough, please tell us, so it's not a chicken and egg scenario. Those 3 bullets on your slide deck were really helpful, but it's not quite enough, I think, for us to give you the meat that you need, so that we do have your backs, because that's a major institutional shift that we're asking you to make. We get that. Maybe don't think we get it. I think we do get it. I've experienced it as a mother in the school district, and everybody across the area has experienced it in that, at least in that domain. And that's a massive shift from business as usual. But if we do it within a year, we will see different data on that same spreadsheet and on those maps, and that's what we're asking you to do. So it might be that we make a little mistake without a traffic engineer, so maybe we don't need the staffing for the traffic engineer. I'm venturing to say that maybe the police chief would differ with me, maybe you would differ with me, but I think there are some things that we can do in the same way that it's easy to put a speed bump in a spot. We can put speed bumps down a whole street, as that's the low-hanging fruit on a street where we see these problems already happening. better that we make a small mistake and put it, I don't know, on the wrong street where there are 7 speed bumps, where there are 50 in another neighborhood, and by the time you're finished, you got them all over that neighborhood, than that we see another death. So I guess that's what we're asking for, and I know it's a lot to ask for you to do that. But anyway, I hope that's clear. And then, I'm sorry, that's not really a question. And then my last set of points is around safe routes. I took the liberty today to call Sims and Rolling Terrace because I have kids there, because in Ward 5, that's where our kids go to school. And I know that it's a long-standing frustration. You've heard me say it a lot. I'm just going to say it again, that a lot of times we talk about Tacoma Park Elementary, Piney Branch, and Tacoma Middle, and we don't talk about how our kids in Ward 5 are getting to Sims and Rolling Terrace. And there's a lot of Purple Line construction right now as you come right out of the city towards Sims. It's so dreadful that I want to tell you my conversation today with the Sims. I won't say who it was, a high-level administrator at Sims. I said, so what are you guys doing today for Walk and Roll Day? Anything? And I said, I'm a council member and a mom, and all our kids go to your school. And she said, nothing. And I said, you didn't have any events? Nope, no events. They didn't have any events today. I said, did you get a call from the city? They may have gotten a call and she may not have known. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here. But it was sad to me that they're doing nothing and they've got the worst safety all around their school, yet there are people walking and riding to their school every day, and they're coming from our city. And she didn't recall a time recently that they had gotten any support to do that event, and that, again, that may not be quite right. And then I called Rolling Terrace. They too weren't doing anything much today, but they had a conversation with your staff, so thank you. They were excited to have met Casey Ann Webley, and I said we haven't had all the staff we needed. But they're planning to do the October 18th Walking Wednesday that's being funded by the county. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say that I said to them, and I invite you to share with me your thoughts on this. I said to them, look, as a council member, I really hope that in the coming years, we can figure out whether what you need from the city, if anything, is us coming out to the city line and supporting you out to that line and the county takes you the rest of the way. Or if it's that, you have enough resources and you're all good. I just want to make sure that our kids in this part of the city are getting what the other kids are getting. So let's see. I think I've covered, I'm sorry I talked a lot. I think I've covered, one more plug, because you were also talking about bike access. So this is another bucket, and then I'll shut up. I would love to help you also figure out how to resource, as you're working on the Maple Connectivity Project and others, how we could get interns or maybe a university or something to help support that study that we've been talking about to assess all of the buildings on Maple Avenue, as well as maybe in some of the other lower income, high density areas of housing in the city, where looking at the biking infrastructure before we move very far forward along your process, on whether people have bike cages in their buildings, whether they're allowed to take bikes up into their apartments, whether they have the infrastructure basically to have a bike, and feel more ready to embrace the process that you guys are doing. I'm very fearful that we're going to get a lot of kickback from what I'm hearing from residents so far. Done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gibson.
Just one sort of general question, or as I'm looking through this, we talk about, or you talk about sidewalks and the committee that did a really extensive job on safe streets, et cetera. My question is, is this new sidewalks, and the question only, as opposed to, and then what is the process for renovated, repairing older sidewalks that may not be ADA compliant? I'd also like to see a process for that. I had Director Braithwaite is aware a fairly negative experience on Booty Avenue, where the city thought that we had to tear up our sidewalks and narrow the street, an already narrow street. I also have had talk with residents that have wondered why their 4-foot wide sidewalk was taken up to put a 5-foot wide. It's ADA compliant. The question I have is there a process, or what is the process for these, those that don't qualify as new sidewalks? And I guess I'm looking for a process there. And there's the Boyd Alley is another example of the people don't know what the process is to have that repair for the apron to the alley that goes across the sidewalk there. So,
Well, that's a lot.
but
And
just what is- yeah.
It is 10:30, so I will be brief, but the process we've been talking about is new sidewalks. That's the resolution that council passed.
does that mean that where there aren't any sidewalks?
Where there aren't any sidewalks, and in fact, the policy says it's to not put a sidewalk on a street that already has one on one side, that the city had made it clear that these sidewalks are for
Good,
streets
good.
with no sidewalks first, and that we wouldn't take anybody into the queue that had an existing sidewalk to add a second until the sidewalks, we had a sidewalk network on one side. So the council has a capital budget that it funds every year. That's the mechanism for funding new sidewalks. We do have a policy that was established for new sidewalks. I've provided that numerous times, but we'll be happy to provide it again in terms of an engineering agreement, standards. There's language that the city council has authorized that dictates how we look at new sidewalks and the criteria. As Councilmember Dabala said, there is a list of priorities related to sidewalks, tree impacts,
Right.
where the utility poles on. Anyway, I could go on and on. For ADA, that is also a capital budget funded item. The council in 2010 made a decision to make existing sidewalks ADA compliant and set out a budget item in the capital budget that it chose to fund annually. So that's the basic mechanism that the city moves towards that. It was, the decision was made for several reasons. One is that it's a requirement to make ADA compliant sidewalks in terms of any time you do any improvements, you have to bring your buildings up to code. The city also decided at that point that it was an equity issue, and it was a safety issue, and it tied into the city's goal of having a walkable and safe community. So there are council ordinances that were passed at the time when that was established, and quite a bit of council discussion that took place as to bringing existing sidewalks up into compliance with ADA requirements. The council makes a decision every year about what it's going to fund. So that is a decision that the council makes. And then with those funds, we work through sidewalk compliance.
Thanks. Is there a queue then, or is there a list, a prioritization? We talked about a queue.
Right. When, as Councilmember Hanzak mentioned, in 2009, we had Tool Design Group do an analysis of citywide missing sidewalks, and they set out a first, second, and third tier priorities for where those missing sidewalks were. And so we've been working our way through that process. As mentioned in the presentation, we're 87% finished with ADA compliance on sidewalks.
So you're saying that there is a list then, or
Yes,
a
the Tool
prioritiza-
Design did an analysis citywide of sidewalks and tiered them first, second, and third tier as to how easy it would be to make them compliant.
Okay.
And so we are
So
working
I
our way
guess
through
I'd
it.
like to see that, or that list then, or if you'll.
Sure, we can send you the maps and,
Yeah.
it's a list of about 300 sidewalk sections. Happy to send it, and it shows where those, where that work has been done. Obviously, we wouldn't hop around the city doing only first priorities. We picked neighborhoods, and we moved through the neighborhood, doing compliance with each of the neighborhoods. That way, it makes it clear, and we're not creating situations where you've got an unsafe sidewalk next to a safe sidewalk. So we, for constructability purposes, you start at one area and you do it in a contiguous manner. Goody Avenue is one of the more challenging streets to do sidewalk compliance because of the narrowness and the need for parking and the very tight nature of the road. But I think it exemplifies the challenge that we will have anytime we try to change the process that we currently have, because some people will say things like, we don't have people that need to have sidewalks in our neighborhood, so nobody's in a wheelchair. Things that you couldn't imagine people will say in terms of disrespect for those that are less abled or may benefit. But the main goal that the council had in establishing the program was to make a walkable city. So
Right.
they've been putting funding into that year after year.
Just one other kind of clarification then. The prioritization that the company, I forgot what you mentioned. had
Tool
given-
Design Group was the initial analysis done in
Right,
2009.
so that, there is no process for, no petition process, no neighborhood process. This is driven by this analysis.
It's driven by funding. So the city set out a goal of making sure all our existing sidewalks were ADA
Right.
compliant, and they set out a funding amount each year to move towards that goal.
But the application of that funding is based on tier 1, 2, and 3 that's created by this.
That was the initial analysis of, as I've said, you have to do work in neighborhood orients. You
understood.
can't pick,
Understood.
you know, so anyway,
But
we
again,
are
to
worked
clear-
our
to-
way around the neighborhood.
Just
We
to
are,
clarify that it's different than if somebody wanted a new speed hump, or they wanted a new sidewalk.
Sure.
There's a petition process, or we're looking at a new process here that could be done. In this case,
Yeah.
with existing sidewalks, the process is driven by this
Yeah.
categorization primarily.
right.
Thank you.
And I would say that all existing sidewalks have been made ADA compliant in wards 5 and in ward 6, and in wards 3. We have remaining sidewalks that we need to complete, and I think ward 2 is complete as well, in wards 1 and 4.
Thank you.
And I do just want to piggyback on that, because I know that the point was made earlier around council direction to staff, right? In that example that Director Braithwaite just highlighted, the council said our goal is to have 100% of our sidewalks to be ADA compliant. That sent the message to staff that they have been given the authorization to figure out how to make sure that all of our sidewalks are ADA compliant. And so similar guidance, and I think that's that juxtaposition that folks are talking about. Making sure that we're able to clearly communicate in terms of our processes, specifically as it relates to the petition and other aspects of community engagement and staff engagement in that process, is where we would need to say, we want to make sure that this process includes at least 2 touch points with residents. We want to not have to rely on people to go door to door, but we really do want people to be notified either through the newsletter or through some mailers. Though that kind of specificity in the recommendations that we're asking for folks to send forward is really helpful, because then that enables staff to develop the possible options that kind of meet those demands. Council wants to make sure that we're voting before anything gets funded. I don't know, making it up. But those are some of the kinds of things that are helpful in terms of feedback that we can provide that will give them some general parameters of what proposals they can provide to us that would generally be acceptable from the perspective of council. Councilmember Fulcher.
Funding has come up a couple of times, and I just want to say that on my part, it was strategic on, like, you know, not wanting a lot of money to go towards sidewalks or traffic calming measures, because we hadn't gotten to a point where we had the criteria put in. And so, like, that is why I didn't want to put more funding into those things that were so inequitable. And then just so that we're clear where I'm at with recommendations of where we're going, it's the Complete Streets recommendations that they made in 2021 that were in the resolution in 2022. Like, those are what I'm hoping to see in criteria that we'll be using for the process for putting in traffic calming and sidewalk in the future.
Councilmember DeBala.
No, I think that's a leftover.
Okay. All right. I do have one last question. So the expanding the school zone, I'm practical to a fault. So what would be the process needed for us to just do that, right? You know, is it that there needs to be some action by council? Is it that, you know, the staff have to do some follow-up with the state? What would be the process for us to make a determination around the parameters for expanding our school zones?
I will need to look that up and get back to you with a fuller answer, but I'm fairly certain that it is council action that
Okay.
we would come up with a recommendation.
Just
and
piggyback
then-
off that also, how it is affected by state highway, by state highways.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. That is something that I would like to see this council move forward, and something that we could perhaps, depending on what you come back with, do in a more expedited pace, and wouldn't necessarily have to wait until January to do it.
I'm sorry, one other piece, which is, I know that one of the concerns about the speed limits is that they're unenforceable. So another question would be, are those speed limits enforceable when they're in the school zones, even though they're the lower speed limits?
Yeah. So that would be helpful for us to understand, and I want to make sure you all got all of that. What is the council's role in terms of moving forward with the expansion of our school zone area? What role does state highway play in all of this, and what would be the
Enforceability.
the
for the
enforceability?
police.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulcher. That would be really helpful for me to know, because I think that may be something that we might be able to do. Another thing, I do want us to, sometimes I know that we are really stressed with just, we're bound by our borders, right? So we can only, for the most part, influence the school zone traffic requirements as it pertains to schools that are within the city limits. But I would like for us to identify approaches we may be able to take for those schools that are on our borders where our students attend them. But perhaps they are the school zones or the parameters in which surround those schools are problematic, because I would be open to sending a letter, if possible, to MCPS or whoever we need to send a letter to ensure that there's consistency. I think it's important for us to be mindful of where our kids go, and less so around, and keeping them safe, and a little less so around the boundaries of the city in this regard. Okay. Councilmember Honzak?
It brings to mind something I've considered, and I wonder whether you, the mayor, or perhaps our staff have seen it before. You know, we have a number of areas in my ward, and I suspect it's true in Ward 6 in particular, where you have larger buildings, where you have denser populations, where you'll see like 30 or 40 kids getting on a single bus several times over in the morning. And in fact, I've noticed a pattern just this year with school bus stops working more carefully to try to have their buses come to single locations. Like there's a daycare on Flower Avenue, I think, Cindy, in your ward, where I'm being compelled to go now. I can't go to the other one where there are 40 kids every morning for just one school. Anyway, what I'm wondering is, has anyone ever seen those flashing lights be used to slow people down around bus stops where you have a lot of people in one spot? Because it seems like that would be very wise. Is that a practice?
When you say flashing lights, do you mean like a beacon that's
that says
on-
like school zone, end school zone? Is that, I can't think of a time, but we have a number of buildings like that. I don't know if that happens more in
Yeah, I
other
mean, I
spots.
think the thing is Yeah, I think the challenge is in a number of cases, these bus stops are actually outside of the school zone, right? So
No, that's exactly what I'm getting at. Is
Yeah.
that, and yet, in fact, you have so many kids that are gathering in those spaces. They are definitely unsafe, and they are inside the city's borders.
Yeah.
Versus, yeah.
yeah, I do think though, and I know Director Braithwaite, and I know we've had this conversation a few times too, about really trying to take stock of our more widely used bus stops throughout the city. And I know that we typically do certain aspects, and Chief can correct me if I'm wrong, but we do at the beginning of the school year kind of go around to try to take an assessment of where those bus stops are, and to be mindful of the number of kids that are getting on and off those buses. I think too, when we're thinking through the criteria for traffic calming and how that juxtaposes with safe routes to school, how are we looking at and what criteria do we have for those highly populated bus stops that are in various neighborhoods, and how are we making sure that they're ADA compliant, there's enough of a bump out, there's clearly defined crosswalks that are there, because I know Hopewell and Larch, that was for that sidewalk project, that was a big deal, trying to make sure there was a large enough bump out that would allow the number of kids that need to get on that school bus and off the school bus every day to be able to safely cross. Can you talk a little bit about what the city has been doing in that regard?
Sure. I just also wanted to mention about the flashing lights, Councilmember Honzak. There's only 2 places in the city where we have flashing lights associated with traffic speed limit notice related to school zones. That's Maple Avenue and Philadelphia Avenue. We don't have any other flashing lights associated with speed limits that I'm aware of in the city, nor do I see them very often in other places. The Maple Avenue ones were installed by the city. The Philadelphia Avenue one is owned and maintained by State Highway, but it's because it's the designated school zone. And those flashing lights only happen during school times, so they are supposed to be turned off in the summer and don't happen before or after. Anyway, back to your question of part of that answer is that's why it's so critical to have a safe routes to school coordinator on staff, because they can work with the school system to keep us apprised of the school bus routes. It changes year to year, as do the number of students on each bus stop. So that's it's kind of a moving target. We get more information from the residents in a neighborhood on any given year than we could from any database that I've seen. Now, planning may know of others that I've not seen, but it's very challenging to get that information because the school bus stops do change year to year, and the number of kids that are getting on also change. I think that's an area where we could really do some improvement with MCPS, and we've had some successes in strongly encouraging them not to maintain certain bus stops in areas where we determine were really hazardous. And we've had some non-successes where we've made a strong worded recommendation and they just do it anyway. So it is an area that's, I think, really ripe for our Safe Routes to School coordinator to be helping feed us some of that information, because that is an area where you can make very specific improvements that will matter a lot to the school kids. Even just having somewhere to stand, which in some of our school bus stops, there isn't a place to stand that's not in the street. A lot of room for improvement there.
Great, thank you. All right, I don't see any more lights, and I can just say thank you so much for all of the work that you all have been doing and continue to do on this important issue. And we look forward to continuing to work with you all and the Public Space Management Plan, and as we continue to work towards implementing the recommendations from the Safe Streets Committee. All right, thank you all so much. All right, so that is our last work session for this evening. So I am going, yes, I will second that motion. All right, everyone have a great night.